Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of The Journeymen, a podcast on which I, Michael Pattison, and my co-host,
Bobby Lowe,
proceed chronologically through the filmography of underrated or overlooked filmmakers, or at least filmmakers who more or less fit that description, one director at a time. Follow us on Twitter at _Journeymen. Subscribe to us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and or YouTube. This episode, dedicated to Darren Aronofsky, was originally recorded as part of our previous podcast, The Habitus, and aired on 12th of October 2017. Aronofsky was born in New York City on February the 12th, 1969, and has to date 7 features to his name. They are Pi, which he made in 1998, Requiem for a Dream, 2000, The Fountain, 2006, The Wrestler, 2008, Black Swan, 2010, Noah, 2014, and Mother, 2017. He also has 4 short films credited to his name online. These are Supermarket Sweep, 1991, Fortune Cookie, 1991, Protozoa, 1993, and No Time, 1994. And Bobby and I were able to view 2 of these short films and also discuss them straight after this audio clip. They are Fortune Cookie and No Time.
What you need is something from Mother Nature. Something untamed. Something wild. Representing luck. Coated with luck. Distilled with luck. Tested for decades. Revered for centuries. Honored for millennia. You need a lucky rabbit's foot.
Okay. Well, we'll begin at the beginning with 2 of his early short films. IMDb lists 4 early films. I'm sure there were more, but only 2 of them seem to be available online. So we'll begin with the first one, which is 1991's Fortune Cookie, loosely inspired, according to the on-screen credit, by a novel by Hubert Selby Jr., who wrote Requiem for a Dream, which we'll get to later. So this is the story of 3 traveling salesmen who are experiencing varying degrees of luck, and one of them discovers that the fortune cookies that he gets at a local Chinese restaurant, we're not sure exactly how they affect they increase his luck, and
I think they create a placebo effect in his mindset,
right.
And as soon as, we all know what the kind of aphoristic, ambiguous, widely applicable tone of a fortune cookie, fortune. And I think it just puts him in a certain mindset where his luck changes because he's able to then go about his daily business in a much more positive sense. But this being an Aronofsky short, we get increasing obsession from the protagonist's need for this changing fortune. Did you like it?
Yeah, I quite did. I think it's a solid student film. It has a strong premise. I mean,
it's funny, isn't it?
I think I was surprised when I saw that it was 32 minutes long. I was expecting it to be a bit of a drag, but I think it supports its running time.
Yeah, and we get this rapid, punchy moments of montage that Aronofsky, at this very, very early stage, was incorporating into his storytelling techniques, which we see to a much more repetitive degree in Requiem for a Dream.
Right.
I liked it also. I thought it was very funny. It's got a rhythm to it. It's punchy. It's very kind of laid back and shaggy. It could be probably like 10 minutes, and the same story could be told. But such
I don't know. I thought that it supported its running time. It has a clear 3-act structure, and I think you could make a feature, from the same story.
Do you want him
quite
to make
easily
a feature from it?
I do like stories about traveling salesmen, like Glengarry Glen Ross, and even The Founder from earlier this year.
Have you seen Salesman by the Maisels?
No.
The documentary. It's a great observational verite style document of an actual traveling salesman, like a door-to-door salesman.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Going into the houses of clients and whatnot.
It's such a enduring American cultural archetype.
It is, but that was made in the 70s. This feels very archaic,
right,
and in a very deliberate way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good. I mean, it's interesting to watch this because I only saw them very, very recently, and it's interesting to watch them after watching over the course of nearly 20 years. The features.
Yeah. I'd recommend it. It's on YouTube.
It's got a great funny turn from Stanley B. Herman, the character actor, as Pervert,
right,
the guy who shows up sporadically to invite the protagonist into his car, and he has a great line towards the end of the film. Hey, you wanna fuck my wife? What's the matter? You gay? That's okay. After fucking my wife, you can fuck me.
Yeah. I also really liked the scene in the toilet. I thought that was very funny. It was also grossing me out that they were eating the fortune cookies. He's noted that also. He's shitting in the toilet, and then he passes with his hands. He passes the fortune cookie underneath the partition, and the guy eats the fortune cookie. And then also. It's making me squirm a little.
So there's two other shorts
that are not
which aren't available in full. Supermarket Sweep, which is also credited to 1991,
right?
And Protozoa,
which is he took for the name of his production company.
Yeah, Supermarket Sweep, not to be confused with Dale Winton's British game show Supermarket Sweep.
Yeah, I'm sure he drew from that for the supermarket scenes in The Wrestler.
Yes, indeed. And then we've got No Time, which is a 22 minute short, which was made in 1994, minutes. And it's actually a number of shorts within a short because it's basically like it feels like the pilot episode of a sketch show.
Yes, the worst sketch show of all time.
The worst sketch show of all time.
Yes,
you didn't like this?
No, what? It was almost unendurable.
Really?
Yeah. So it's 7 or 8. Painfully unfunny comic sketches by a 4-person comedy troupe who wrote and conceived and performed all the material in it, they're playing 4 flatmates in Manhattan and also playing other characters. It is dreadful. It reminded me of those YouTube videos where somebody has taken the laugh track off a terrible sitcom like Big Bang Theory and it just turns into a nightmare. It was almost unwatchable.
Really? Wow, I'm surprised to hear you say that because when I was watching it again very recently, I was thinking, I wonder what Bobby makes of this. I think it's very funny actually for me. I mean, to varying degrees. There's that sketch where some guy has walked his date home back to her apartment, and they discover, and she's really kind of overbearing, and she's cornered him at the end of the corridor, and then they discover that they both have a false eye each, a glass eye. And then there's a comedy situated around that. And then there's this other sketch in which 2 flatmates are bored and they're without a television, and they begin this improvised routine about who stole the cookies from the cookie jar. Didn't you find that charming?
No.
Oh.
I will say that the one with the end of the date was probably the best of them. Although the performance of the woman is incredibly annoying. But
she's meant to be, though.
Yeah, but she was annoying me, not just the character, not just the other guy.
Okay, fair enough.
I wouldn't recommend this one. I think it's definitely a low point in his career.
But it is widely available to see.
They're both those films are on YouTube.
And well, I mean, if your worst film is made before all of your features, then I think that's to be discussed, of course.
No, that's definitely his worst film.
(12:45) Restate my assumptions. 1. Mathematics is the language of nature. 2. Everything around us can be represented and understood through numbers. 3. If you graph the numbers of any system, patterns emerge. Therefore, there are patterns everywhere in nature. Evidence. The cycling of disease epidemics. The wax and wane of caribou populations. sunspot cycles, the rise and fall of the Nile. So what about the stock market? A universe of numbers that represents the global economy, millions of human hands at work, billions of minds, a vast network screaming with life. An organism. A natural organism. My hypothesis, within the stock market there is a pattern as well. Right in front of me, hiding behind the numbers. Always has been. 1250, press return.
Okay, so getting into his first feature film then, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January of '98, Pi, occasionally subtitled Faith in Chaos. What's your history with this film?
I'd seen it once before, many years ago, recorded from television onto a blank VHS. And actually, rewatching it recently, I felt there's a reason why I never felt compelled to rewatch this. I don't know about you.
I've seen it a few times. I mean, like when I first encountered Aronofsky, he had only made Pi and Requiem for a Dream. It would have been like 2002, 2003, and he was. I would put him kind of in the same category as somebody like Richard Kelly, who at the time had made Donnie Darko, and he was this kind of like gateway, weird intellectual filmmaker. Obviously, he went on to have a more successful, enduring career than Richard Kelly, who kind of crashed and burned after Donnie Darko. But so I had seen both Pi and Requiem for a Dream a few times back then, but I hadn't seen either of them since 2005 or something like that. And revisiting Pi, I quite liked it.
Yeah, there's certainly lots of things to like about it, but I think overall it's kind of a weak link in his feature career. I think that like I love it. It does feel very much, and obviously we're burdened with hindsight when we say things like this, but it does feel very much like a debut feature.
Yeah.
It's got this lo-fi rough edge to it, an improvisatory feel to it that lots of sequences in it feel like they were shot on the cuff on the streets of New York.
As they were, yeah.
And he introduces very early on in his career this use of the snorri cam, I think, with that intensified subjectivity. So it's about this mathematician,
right? Yeah,
right, who's trying to
math savant,
and who's trying to play the stock market or uncover the secret mathematical code that will allow him to profit from it. That's what I got from it anyway.
I wouldn't have said that he was trying to profit necessarily from it. I think he's more trying to understand some sort of overriding system that
you're right. You're right. So, because then there are other sort of more insidious forces in the film who want to use his information.
Yeah, he calls them petty materialists. He says he's trying to understand our world. Yeah, I was actually surprised to learn when I actually listened to the director's commentary track, and he said that it costs something like $50,000 or $60,000 a day to shoot on the New York subway, or
wow,
which is just like that's the whole budget of the film, you know?
Yeah. No, I mean, doesn't he also reveal that the opening credits alone cost like $2,000?
I'm actually not sure about that.
A former
one of his friends made them.
Roommates, who successfully gone on to another career of his own in that kind of thing.
Right.
But I like it. I like it's Matthew Libatique, who also shot No Time, by the way, who's his recurrent cinematographer from here on out. It's got a washed out flashback feel to it, like the kind of flashbacky sequence we'd find in a film. Embedded within the film, but like a break from its formal qualities. Right. Whereas actually the whole film is shot like this, and so it's got this really, I don't know, this again, this idea of the intensified subjectivity, but there's a pervasive paranoia to it,
right,
which I find quite effective.
Yeah. I agree with you that it feels very much like a debut film, also because it is so stuffed with ideas. It has that feeling of a filmmaker who has finally got an opportunity, or an aspiring filmmaker who's finally got an opportunity to make a film, and now doesn't know whether he'll ever get a chance to make another one. So a lot of debut films have this kind of like overstuffed, like everything in the kitchen sink kind of feel to them, and it is. I mean, it's very much ideas before story. It feels like 5 or 6 different ideas, very, very, very thinly connected to each other, almost like free associative kind of conceptual connections. You know, it's a paranoid thriller. It's about machine consciousness. It's about Jewish theology. It's about numerology. It's about body horror. You know, it's one of those urban paranoia apartment films, kind of like, you know, like Repulsion, or even has a kind of a Jacob's Ladder kind of feel to it. But I don't know. I kind of like that kind of like freewheeling journey through a lot of kind of high-minded concepts, even if they don't really hang together particularly convincingly. And he insists that, you know, all of the ideas, not that they're, you know, necessarily true ideas or whatever, but that these are ideas that people do believe, and it's the connections between them that are fictional for the purposes of the film.
It's obvious that this is a filmmaker who thinks in images as well, which I think is really important. It's not just the actual ideas in terms of their content, but the way he packages them into cinematic moments. Like, I think of like certain moments where, like, for no particular reason, there's a sort of non-diegetic ticking on the soundtrack in one of the subway scenes, which turns out to be the diegetic dripping of blood from somebody on the opposite platform. And it's just like creepy moments like that. I don't really, as you said, sort of piece together in any sort of overly coherent way, like, which is not we're not really sure if the characters, if that's in his consciousness or if that's actually happening. And then I mean, in that moment, maybe it is revealed to be, you know, a fantasy on his part or a hallucination. But I
do think that
what does it all mean, though? What does it mean?
I think I like to interpret it as a reflection of the kind of that feeling of vertigo that you can get when you're trying to understand society. You know, like the complex systems. You know, it's essentially like structured around a lot of very kind of simple and basic kind of binaries, like intellect versus emotion, machines versus body, you know, ordered systems versus chaos, science versus mysticism. You know, I think it works. You know, I think it like, you know, I'm glad it's not 2 hours long, but, you know, it works at 78 minutes or whatever. And I like the very 90s New York kind of thing. It has a kind of almost like an Abel Ferrara kind of feel to some of the
and I agree with that.
The guerrilla filmmaking kind of style. The visual style, I actually think that when I saw Pi, I think that was what led me to Shinya Tsukamoto and like films like Tetsuo the Iron Man and Tokyo Fist and things like that. The visual style is very seemingly inspired by that.
I mean, not only is this a film by somebody who thinks in images, but it's also a cinephile, which is maybe the two go hand in hand. Like, you know, you mentioned Ferrara there. There is a great moment. Actually, the one moment of the film, like, I was trying to think, what do I remember of this film when I saw it, you know, when I saw it many, many years ago. And there was less moments than the actual tone and feel of it, which you know, in itself is an indication of, I think, a strength, maybe. But there is one moment that I did remember, but I didn't realize it happens at the very, very end of the film, and it's when he, you know, drills his own skull. So, you know, that might be a veiled homage to the Driller Killer. Oh yeah, sure, maybe maybe so, yeah. But this kind of Pi only really makes sense to me as a film in which a lookalike of a cross between John Cusack and William Fichtner shaves his head and then becomes a lookalike of the cross between Gaspar Noé and Moby. And other than that, it doesn't really stay with me. Other than its images. He tells a funny story actually on the commentary track about, you know, the scene where they have the brain in the New York subway. And he finds the brain on the steps and he's poking it with a pen, and when he pokes the brain,
he hears the train coming, so it's like it's supposed to be his brain that he's manipulating. Apparently, a New York cop got off the subway and came up to them and looked at what they were doing. They had this brain on the steps, and she just kind of nodded and went, "Okay," and walked on. And they were like, "Wow, that was really nice of her." And then it turned out that Woody Allen was shooting his latest film across the street, and she had apparently assumed that they were second unit for Woody Allen. I want to see that Woody Allen film.
Only in New York,
right,
so it is very much a New York film.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's just like it's full. It's overflowing with ideas that I think are intellectually stimulating in isolation.
Yes,
and they don't even necessarily need to be. I mean, if you really need them to connect to each other, then that's probably the thinnest part of the film. But it's the unexpected, like literal or figurative connections between them and their relation to those binary themes.
Yeah,
it works for me. I enjoy it.
And again, the binary opposites is compounded by the extremely washed out black and white form of the cinematography.
Yeah. Also, the Hebrew sect, which is apparently a real sect within Judaism, were originally supposed to be like an ancient order of Pythagorean monks, and he decided to change it.
Okay.
He said it was a slightly kind of out of place or something to have people running around in like monastic robes. It just didn't really kind of fit the mise en scène, I guess.
Yeah, coming to the mise en scène, I mean, coming back to what you said also earlier about the sentient machinery that kind of emerges within and from that. I'm also, it's obviously very Cronenbergian, the way the mise en scène kind of grows in that sense.
Right.
And I suppose he returns to that later on with Mother, which we're leading to.
Yeah, actually, one more thing I wanted to say was when I was getting into all of these kind of alternative auteurs in the early 2000s, there was a tendency, as there always is, to kind of declare that so-and-so is the heir of so-and-so. So Richard Kelly was declared very, very prematurely the heir to David Lynch because of Donnie Darko. And, Paul Thomas Anderson was the heir to either like Robert Altman or Martin Scorsese. Aronofsky was the heir to Kubrick at the time, which is a kind of a torch that has seemingly passed now to Christopher Nolan.
Yes.
In seemingly in popular discourse, but
do you think that's a fair reference?
I can see it in relation to Pi and Requiem for a Dream, but I don't think Kubrick would ever have made a film like The Fountain or The Wrestler.
You don't think?
No.
I think there's certain comparisons in their methodologies in terms of this extremely formally controlling and controlled director, and films that perhaps aren't overly situated around or interested in like the audience identifying with the characters, or is that to perpetuate a cliche that is unfair around Kubrick?
That's kind of the reason that I say I don't think that Kubrick would have made a film like The Fountain, which we'll get to The Fountain. Okay. Yeah.
Well, he did make Paths of Glory though.
That's true. Yeah, that is true.
Before he got the the repute that he did.
Yeah, that's true. I was gonna also say that the scene in the subway with Brain, that was when I was trying to make my my magnum opus short film, Cartesian Theater.
Right. Yeah,
that was a shot that I was trying to create was a brain. I was going to have it crawling with spiders, and I went to the butchers and I tried to get a brain, but it was during the BSE outbreak. They were destroying brains. So that put the kibosh on that idea. But I'm sure that I don't remember consciously lifting it out of Pi, but obviously that image stuck with me.
Yeah. What could have been?
Yeah, maybe I'll finish it one day.
Yeah. Well, what still could be. So, moving on.
Okay, so in between our discussions of each of his films, I'm going to just run down some of the projects that he was attached to and that he didn't make.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing that he was attached to was immediately, like when Pi was a hit at Sundance, he announced that his follow-up would be a film called Proteus, which would be produced by Dimension Films.
Okay.
Which was a horror thriller about a haunted World War II submarine.
Okay.
Which
But that
it ended up being produced by Aronofsky and directed by David Towey under the title Below in 2002.
Yeah.
And it's a pretty good film.
Not the Johnny Depp drugs pushing film.
No, that's Below. So this is Below.
Ah, Below. Right.
Below,
sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, by David Towey. It's a good film.
Okay.
He was also attached later that year to an adaptation of Frank Miller's sci-fi samurai graphic novel called Ronin. Which that was at New Line. Which he remained attached to it for a long time. I doubt he still is, but certainly in the mid 2000s he was still talking about, we're still developing Ronin.
So this film to date hasn't been made?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
Right.
Okay. Sorry. In the coverage of that project, they had to be clear that it had no relation to John Frankenheimer's Ronin, which had just come out. Yeah. So it came out in '98. But anyway, so one of the projects that he had wanted to make, since he was a film student, was an adaptation of Requiem for a Dream. So that did end up being his follow-up to Pi.
What is the big deal about being on television? Those pills you take are to kill you before you ever get on, for Christ's sake.
Big deal? You drove up in a cab. Did you see who had the best seat? I'm somebody now, Harry. Everybody likes me. Soon, millions of people will see me and they'll all like me. I'll tell them about you, your father, how good he was to us. Remember? It's a reason to get up in the morning. It's a reason to lose weight, to fit in a red dress. It's a reason to smile. It makes tomorrow all right. What have I got, Harry? Why should I even make the bed or wash the dishes? I do them. But why should I? I'm alone. Your father's gone. You're gone. I got no one to care for. What have I got, Harry? I'm lonely. I'm old.
You got friends, Ma?
It's not the same. They don't need me. I like the way I feel. I like thinking about the red dress and the television and you and your father. Now when I get the sun, I smile.
So when I rewatched Requiem for a Dream recently, I was also reading Tanya Lane's book Bodies in Pain, which is an overview of a scholarly overview of the many themes that emerge and styles that emerge across Aronofsky's work. And actually, I want to open discussion of Requiem for a Dream with a quotation from that, although she's quoting Daniel Frampton's Philosophy book, 2006 Wallflower Press. I don't know if you've read Philosophy. I haven't, although I do remember when it came out. No. She says, she quotes Daniel Frampton. He's talking about film mind. So he's talking about like films as almost sort of like sentient works themselves. Not sentient, but like... anyway, I'll just quote it. And he says, style is used to support his argument, this is Frampton's argument, that cinema cannot show the spectator human mental states. Cinema is a state of mind in itself, incorporating intentions, affects, emotions, and other concepts which are transmitted to the spectator during the cinematic experience by means of the film's style. And I think I was reading that, and I think that quotation leapt out at me when I was rewatching Requiem for a Dream, which is a film that it's extremely assaultive. This film, it's adapted from a Hubert Selby Jr. Book.
Did you get an opportunity to read the novel?
I didn't, because the library in which it was located, my local library, was undergoing construction, and I had to get a special permission to access it, and it was a time-sensitive issue, and I didn't get a chance to read it.
Right.
Have you read it?
No.
Okay. I don't know. It's got this relentless energy from the off. Again, I hadn't seen this for many years, and I'd only seen it once previously, and for some reason, it's become one of those films because of its influence on a lot of film and culture since. It had kind of faded in my memory, actually, counterintuitively, or I'd allowed myself to think that this film was worth less or was less valuable than I had remembered it being. And yet, when I rewatched it, I thought, wow, this is actually quite a powerful film indeed.
As I said, I loved Pi and Requiem for a Dream when I first encountered them, and I hadn't seen Requiem for a Dream since kind of 2005, 2006 or whatever. But it's weird because even without having ever revisited the film, I, for some reason, kept going back and forth on it, and I was at one point swayed by the arguments that the film is, a completely hysterical take on drug addiction, and almost feels like a kind of moral panic kind of film. And when I revisited the film, this time I anticipated not really caring about that, because I also remembered the first encounter with the film and having this sense that it was like a kind of an emotional vortex, that it was this incredibly powerful kind of, it has this kind of gravitational kind of inevitability to what the characters go through, which is, I think, one way of approaching this kind of subject. You put it in the context of like a system that grinds people down. You portray the characters as though they are objects kind of buffeted by systemic forces, and it depends on your perspective, but it can be read as nihilistic, or it can be read as like really powerfully critical of the system in which these people exist. But I didn't really feel it this time.
Left you cold.
Yeah, I found. I mean, the story, the Harry, Marion, Ty storyline is. I mean, it's a boilerplate heroine storyline.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the style? What Aronofsky calls his hip hop montage style, which he says is he suggests that he talks about it again in relation to Pi, the idea that he grew up around hip hop culture, and he felt that hip hop culture had never really fully found its way into film, where so the idea was to quote unquote sample different shots and kind of use them, cut them together. And so you create this kind of repetitive rhythm, and in the case of Pi, it's Max Cohen taking his medicine, and you get this repetitive sequence of like 4 or 5 shots, and then eventually toward the end of the film they can break that sequence that you've become accustomed to. And in Requiem for a Dream, it's taking the drugs.
So it's a formal approximation of sampling techniques rather than a film about hip-hop culture, because it's certainly not that. I wasn't aware that Aronofsky himself had coined this term about his own style. When I was reading the Tanya Lane book, she was referring to this, and it was actually kind of irritating to come across as a term. I was like, this is obviously a scholar who has no affinity to or awareness of hip hop culture.
Right.
So, apologies to Tanya Lane for assuming that was her. But the style, do you find it kind of like an obstacle or to get beyond? Because I think it's actually part of the emotional content of the film. I don't remember being particularly profoundly moved by this as a story to begin with, actually.
Right.
And so I wasn't expecting to be moved this time round, and still I'm not really, in a way.
Okay.
Although as an aesthetic experience, I think it has a certain power. It's a hellish and, for me, hilariously bleak descent into a social hell. Okay. It's an extremely anti-cathartic film, and I think to certain degrees all of Aronofsky's films kind of are. Again with Pi, with that drill moment into the skull, the only real image that I specifically remembered from this film before rewatching it was the scene in which, at the very end of the film, Jared Leto's character Harry has his arm cut off with a saw blade in hospital.
That scene where he's injecting into his disgusting vein.
Which is
pretty hard to watch.
Yeah, and this relentless energy which is there from the off, like the whole split screen thing when he's in his mother's apartment, Ellen Burstyn's apartment, stealing the television, and she's in the bathroom and he's in the kind of lounge area, living area, and he's stealing her television in order to sell it. And then, of course, you've got the whole, Clint Mansell soundtrack, which I think is actually the most sort of culturally influential component of the film, arguably.
Right.
It's used on Sky Sports News at their film montage, football montages,
I remember that.
Whatever.
Yeah. Is it still used?
I think it is, yeah.
Oh, really? Wow.
But I'd forgotten that there's also a percussive beat over the top of it in this film. Yeah. Because when Sky Sports News use it on their football, it's just the strings. Strings version. Mm. But I don't know. It has this. It's a film that. As you said, it's got this sort of propulsive inevitability to it, which is obviously, a deliberate choice. And again, I don't know the extent to which it's faithful to the book.
Mm-hmm. Although he co-wrote it with Selby.
Yeah. So, so regardless of its proximity to the book, it's kind of like an endorsed adaptation, if you like.
Yeah, sure.
We've got Stanley B. Herman again from Fortune Cookie, who actually showed up in Pi on the
I actually meant to say in relation to Pi that in Fortune Cookie he was credited as pervert.
Yes.
And in apparently in Pi, in which he also plays a kind of a pervert on the subway,
on the train,
he requested not to be credited as pervert, so he was credited as mustacheless man. Because he was wary of having a resume that reads pervert.
Yeah, I mean, and also in Requiem for a Dream, he shows up at the very end in this kind of notorious sequence in which Jennifer Connelly's character Marion, undergoes the ultimate humiliation of selling herself for drugs, selling her flesh, her body, and Stanley B. Herman has the exciting line, "ass to ass."
Yeah, that's the scene that they struggled to get. In fact, they didn't get an R rating, did they? They had to release it unrated in the US, I think. Well, how do you feel? So I said that the Harry, Marion, Ty storyline about the, trying to get like a big score and as I said, boilerplate heroin story. How do you feel about the other story, the Ellen Burstyn story about the game show?
Well, I think, oddly, that's sort of the emotional crux of the film, because, you could argue there is sort of a downward arc to all of the characters, that's the point, but, Ellen Burstyn's character begins the movie a lot more differently to her character at the end of the movie than the younger characters do, arguably.
Yes, definitely, I would say so,
so she has prescription pills.
And it's a more unusual arc also, because you can see when you have Harry, Marion, and Ty at the beginning, and they're kind of dabbling in heroin, and then they're also dealing drugs, and you're kind of going, okay, well, this is where I can see where this is going, Whereas with the Ellen Burstyn thing, it's more of a unique storyline. Aronofsky says that the film is not about drug addiction because it's just about addiction in general. But I mean, she's still addicted to uppers and downers,
I suppose. And
food.
Yes, absolutely. But she's also increasingly obsessive about the television, her 15 minutes of fame that she's going to be part of this TV show that she watches. And actually, the way that's kind of framed from the outset, it's not this overly realistic thing to begin with anyway. I mean, I'm sure shows like that do exist, but it's an extremely, again, intensified subjectivity with which we view her position in that world.
I have two problems with the Ellen Burstyn. I agree that it is the emotional center of the film. Although the problem is that it's not central enough. It's too peripheral. It's too isolated. There's only really one scene where Harry visits her, and I know that's part of the story is that she is isolated. But the result of that is that you're left in her own kind of headspace where she's losing grip on reality, and the way that the hallucinatory sequences are played is a little bit too goofy for me. It's not really funny.
The moments where the TV series host enters her apartment and then she sees herself in the apartment.
Yeah, her idealized self. But even
her visits to the doctor as well, where they have that
actually, I don't mind
up.
that. I think I quite like that, but I'm talking about more stuff in the apartment. Yeah, like when she, earlier on, even than that, when she's lying in bed and they have like clip art food images flying around the room. I find it a little bit too goofy and not to the point of being funny. I don't really think the scenes are funny, and I think that's underlined when she eventually goes to the casting agency and demands to know when she's actually going to be on the game show, and she's a complete wreck, and
she has her Rupert Pupkin moment from it did remind me of the King of Comedy, the scene in which Rupert Pupkin also tries to kind of get his way into the Larry Langford show.
I need to rewatch that. But yeah, she's kind of taken aside. People take pity on her, and you get a lot of reaction shots from the people who are tending to her. And they're like, some of them are crying, and some of them are, you can see the emotion in their faces, and it provides a sort of a connection, I think, that is missing before that. It's too crazy before that. It's too almost to the point of being cartoonish before that. Even though Burston's performance is incredible. I mean, I think the scene at the studio is excellent, and the most moving point in the film. Although the visit from Harry, I think, is good too. It's just I find her a little bit too isolated from the rest of the film, and not really given enough emotional, like traumatic contextualization. Also, there's a kind of a vestigial storyline clearly left over from the novel, and that is Ty's relationship with his mother, which is gestured at meaninglessly 2 or 3 times. Really goes nowhere and has no bearing on his actions or anything like that. It should have really been cut entirely, I think. Okay, so after Requiem for a Dream, some of the projects that he was attached to included a reboot of the Batman series at Warner Brothers. Batman and Robin had come out a couple of years previously in 97.
Our old friend Joel Schumacher.
So Warner Brothers had hired Aronofsky to make them a hat. So it was another Frank Miller adaptation. It was an adaptation of his Batman Year One, which was envisioned as an ultra dark, gritty, kind of foreshadowing what the Batman series would ultimately become when it passed over to Christopher Nolan. And a lot of the Batman Begins ideas were taken from Year One, and so a lot of it was.
Would you have been excited by a Darren Aronofsky Batman picture?
I would have been, and I would be now.
Yeah, you would be now. Okay.
Yeah. So Christopher Nolan took that project over in 2003, and it became Batman Begins, and it was no longer a straight adaptation of Year One. Then in 2001, he was attached to an untitled sci-fi thriller, later to be revealed as The Fountain, starring Brad Pitt and Cate Blanchett, which was supposed to go into production in 2002, and it received a green light in July of 2002 at a $70 million budget, and it was going to shoot in October of 2002. But Brad Pitt left the project in August of 2002 over script changes and went to do Troy instead. And Aronofsky moved on to other projects, including an adaptation of a novel by Theodore Roszak called Flicker, which he was attached to in 2003, which is about a film scholar who discovers, he starts studying exploitation films and discovers that there is a religious sect, so harkening back to Pi.
Yeah, this is a very Aronofskian concept.
Yeah, there's a religious sect that is putting subliminal messages into exploitation films in an effort to somehow, I'm not sure exactly how the plot develops, but it's something to do with bringing about the apocalypse. So that has never been made. And he was also, the same year in 2003, he was attached to an adaptation of Lone Wolf and Cub, the manga series.
Yeah.
at Paramount, which I remember. So at this point, I would have been an Aronofsky fan, and I distinctly remember looking forward to, not so much for Batman Year One, that would have been before my time, but the other two, Flicker and Lone Wolf and Cub. I remember looking forward to those films.
Had you seen the original Lone Wolf and Cub series at that point?
No.
Okay.
I saw it shortly after. I still have not seen it actually. I've seen the Shogun Assassin, edit, which is made up of truncated versions of the first two films.
Yeah.
So then in 2004, he was just beginning work on an adaptation of the graphic novel Watchmen, but abandoned it when The Fountain re-emerged with Hugh Jackman and Rachel Weisz at a significantly reduced budget, I think of about $35 million. So they were doing it for about half what they were initially going to do it for. Probably a wise decision on Paramount's part, I would say.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it actually benefits from the shorter runtime as well. I can imagine if it was any longer, its thin plot being extremely stretched.
Yeah.
Because presumably with Cate Blanchett and Brad Pitt involved, it would have been a longer film as well.
Yeah, I would say so. Okay, so that ended up being his follow-up to Requiem for a Dream. It's shot in 2004, and it spent a long time. I mean, I think its premiere was in I think it might have been Venice, 2006. So
yes.
it was 2 years. So it's shot. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's shot summer 2004, and it premiered autumn 2006. Yeah. So it spent a long time in post production.
Yeah, 6 years between your second and third films. A long time to be kind of out of practice.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
I'm stargazing. I found it in the attic.
Come on in, it's freezing.
I want you to see something. Come on. You're an old fart.
Come on. Okay.
Go on, look. You see it?
The gold star?
It's actually a nebula wrapped around a dying star. That's what makes it look gold. What? I took science.
When?
Junior high. The Mayans called it Xibalba.
Xibalba?
It was their underworld. The place that dead souls go to be reborn.
What are you talking about?
My book. I'm writing about it.
I thought it took place in Spain.
Begins there. Ends there.
Are you done?
Almost.
Good, when do I read it?
Someday soon it will explode, die, and give birth to new stars. And how amazing that the Mayans chose a dying star to represent their underworld. Of all the healthy points of light in the sky, how did they find one that was dying?
Okay, so when I first watched The Fountain in 2007, I distinctly remember crying almost throughout. Maybe it was a tough time I was going through in my undergraduate days, because I also cried kind of beginning to end, also through The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, which I had the benefit of seeing in the cinema. The Fountain I actually watched on a very bad stream 10 years ago, and I hadn't seen it since, funnily enough, for a film that moved me to such an emotional degree. Actually, similar to your experience with Requiem for a Dream, this time around I was left a little cold.
Really? That's interesting. I was the opposite. Okay, so I saw the film twice in 2007, and the first time was at the Dublin Film Festival at its Irish premiere, and it was I'm sure it was my most anticipated film of that year. And I remember, we've spoken before about the feeling that you get standing in front of like a masterpiece in an art gallery, feeling nothing, trying to have a transcendental emotional experience, trying to force yourself into it,
Yeah, if you look long enough, something will happen.
Yeah, you'll finally get it. But with when I saw it in the cinema, in the festival, I remember liking it, but not loving it the way that I wanted to love it.
Sure.
And then I watched it on DVD about 6 months later, and I found it really, really moving. And I haven't seen it since. So going back to it, and again, similar to Requiem for a Dream, it's a film that it kind of diminished in my memory a little bit, and I don't know, but revisiting it again, I found it even more moving than that second time. So this time, I thought it was. I think it's a really beautiful film.
I think it is. It's incredibly beautiful, and I
don't just mean visually. I mean, in terms of its themes and its emotional content.
Yeah, and also to date, and what I mean by up to that point, this was his most cohesive film for me as well. That everything seems kind of very tight. It's also a very short film, given that it's such an expansive canvas in which he's working. So it feels very, very disciplined, because it's going across three multiple time zones, 3 dimensions in terms of mental states, I think. And the emotional sort of crux of this film for me is, and I found it very profound 10 years ago, and I find the theme in itself profound still, although the handling of it, I don't know, I don't want to suggest that I dislike the film, because I definitely don't, but the emotional crux for me is this fragile balance between not being able to let go of a loss, an emotional and human loss, and also the point at which that kind of segues into arrogance, as a man of science defying what's physically or biologically possible.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it continues the theme of trying to understand and control the incomprehensible, systems of nature from Pi.
Yeah.
Which is really, I mean, if we take, we're going to get to Noah later, but if we take Noah as an original story, because obviously the actual biblical text is it's 4 pages, so it's loose inspiration.
It's not
but
his most faithful adaptation, let's say.
No, so if we take his Pi, the Fountain, Noah, and Mother as being the 4 kind of original concepts, the continuity of theme between those 4 films is really unusual. Unusually fixated on the same ideas. Do you have a problem with the idea of the character of Tommy as a kind of an arrogant? How do you mean by...
I don't have a problem with it. For me, that's the emotional point of the film. It's the crux around which everything else works. It's the pivot, around which everything works. And I kind of relate to Tommy in a way, that for me this is a profound essay on grief.
Yes.
And when I say essay, it's a deliberate choice of wording here, because I don't think in terms of its story, its plot, I can imagine the treatment for this film to be written on a single page. Actually.
Right.
It doesn't really have a plot.
No. Well, what was most interesting to me when I was doing research for this was that in the original treatment for the film, there was no present day storyline. It was only the conquistador and the astronaut. Right. Which is hard to imagine. But remember that the film was originally supposed to be made in 2001 with Brad Pitt and Cate Blanchett, with twice the budget that they ultimately made it with. So it was supposed to be made with a $70 million budget. And then Brad Pitt pulled out of the project to do Troy instead. Because of late stage script changes that he didn't approve of, which maybe had to do with the present day stuff. I don't know, but I would imagine that the additional budget was for the Conquistador stuff, because that stuff is done on the cheap, very noticeably.
Interestingly, it begins with the Conquistador stuff, and actually we don't get Hugh Jackman and Rachel Weisz in their present day scenario until after that prologue. I think we even see the astronaut before we see those in their real life, let's say, personae. And so I mean, it works for me, narratively, thematically, formally, it's all there. I just, for some reason, was left colder, let's say, than I was 10 years ago. Right. But, a different emotional context.
Absolutely. I think, the film is so visually ordered, in terms of the symmetries between the 3 time periods. You know, you have like the candles in the past, and then you have the fireflies in the present, and the stars in the future, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's even like got a load of match cuts as well, like just
Lots
the
of
actual
it,
visual patterns from one sequence to the next.
But that I like the tension between that rigid visual order and the fact that the connection between the three time periods is quite abstract, and it's more emotional than logical. Like for example, she's writing this story about the conquistador, but it's not clear that the conquistador is fictional. You know,
yes.
I mean, it's not at all. Like there are connections to the present, and you know, are we supposed to take it that Hugh Jackman, his you know, declaration at her funeral that he's gonna cure the disease of death, is successful, and that he's literally the astronaut? I don't like that. I don't really care, you know, because for me the connection is emotional and metaphorical, but it really works. I can't imagine that it would work without the present day storyline. I really can't imagine it. I think that's absolutely the centerpiece of the film. So, and again, you know, it really surprised me to find out that it wasn't included in the original treatment.
The present day storyline also sort of, not only does it glue things together, but it also lends credence to the idea that, you know, that the conquistador stuff is Jackman's imagining of the last chapter, that, you know, Isabel, Rachel Weisz, doesn't get to write because she dies.
Right.
And although that's never confirmed, so again, it's building upon these threads that are simultaneously ambiguous in their sort of origin or like mindset, but also very, very richly sort of cohesive, I think. And again, another thing that's interesting is that we don't really know anything about these characters. Like, they're not really characters in that sense, and yet their scenario is such is so sort of beautifully rendered that it is moving.
Yeah, very much so. I think it's a really, really beautiful film. I also love the design, just the design of the whole film. He said that he wanted to make he was tired of what he calls technolust science fiction, and wanted to do something more organic. You know, so that's where he came up with the bubble ship. You know, and then the circle of the bubble became symbolic of the future timeline. So they made squares and rectangles the shape of the present, and the triangles the shape of the past, and this kind of thing. And when the film reaches its climax and you're cutting back and forth between these three time periods, I mean, like you said, that when I referred to Kubrick you were saying that you know, Aronofsky is a kind of an anti-cathartic filmmaker, but I mean the final sequence of the fountain is certainly an attempt at like really energetic, profound catharsis.
I agree.
And again, I don't think it 100%. Like I find the more sort of low key dramatic center of the film in the present more moving than when it goes completely crazy, and like the Mansell score, which is his best. I mean, it's incredible. You know, performed rather by the Kronos Quartet accompanied by Mogwai.
I agree.
Is really a great score. But you know, the whole thing where he's consumed by Xibalba, the nebula, and also again, these ideas that he's throwing in there that are like really wonderful, beautiful combination of like mythology and history and science fiction and philosophy and religion. Yeah, it's my favorite of his films.
Yeah. Oh, it's your favorite of his films.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. And not like that's. Not just at the point of 2006, 2007, you're going to in his old filmography. Well, we'll come back to that question at the end, because I'm still processing what I make of all of this. But interestingly, on the IMDb page, which I don't like to dwell upon, the idiocies found on this website, but in the goofs section for The Fountain, under errors in geography, this is geography apparently, 16 of 17 people found this interesting. The Xibalba Nebula in the movie is the Orion Nebula, which is not gold and does not contain dying stars, unlike in the movie. It is largely pink from ionized hydrogen gas and is a stellar nursery where young stars are forming. The first stars to die there will be massive and will not create nebulae first. Now,
I'm going to have to knock it down my rankings.
Well, exactly. Had I read that prior to watching this, then, you know, the whole thing doesn't make any sense. No, but the performance is also, this is another kind of fascinating thing for me, to be so to find a film so kind of profoundly moving, and the performances are a large part of that, and yet, as I said just now, the script in terms of the characters is quite thin. I mean, we have a scenario, but we don't really have like an arc, let's say, which is very in line with the rest of his films,
right?
To varying degrees. But I think Hugh Jackman had a great year around about this period, because he'd also been in The Prestige as well once.
Yeah, and X-Men 3.
Side of it. X-Men 3, indeed. And Rachel Weisz is. I mean, that's a very difficult performance to pull off, because she's
really, really great in that movie.
She could very easily be, like a Malikian waif here,
right.
Especially in those sort of flashbacky moments where we get her in a red dress, kind of running through the house, looking back at the camera, and it's it's Jackman kind of remembering his wife, as if he only has one visual memory of his wife, which I always find a little bit comical.
But I do kind of relate to her attempts to kind of come to terms with her own mortality through what would you say,
writing an incomplete manuscript set in conquistadorian Spain or Latin America.
But like the kind of like the terror management theory, where you're kind of like how people are all aware of their own mortality, but somehow we manage to kind of like disavow it and just like go about our lives, as though we're not all like gonna die pretty imminently, in relative terms. But yeah, so I mean, like, I don't know, it is a thematic thing for me that I really relate to a lot of the ideas in it. And I also love the Spanish Inquisition stuff. I think it's great. The body as a prison for the soul, and they're freeing the soul and everything. It's like the ideas interweave really beautifully, make emotional sense next to each other in a way that they don't necessarily in Pi. Pi feels like a kind of like a like you're tumbling through all these different kind of like more or less unrelated ideas. The Fountain feels like a nice kind of like interweaving of metaphors.
Yeah, and also like what you said about Requiem for a Dream being an adaptation that at times feels a little sort of half committal or kind of overly committed to some of its ideas, like the gestures towards like the some of the characters, like connections with their mother and stuff. Whereas this, as an original sort of concept that is followed through fully, it feels like the first film that Aronofsky made that he was able to sort of really commit to with a confident vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so to continue with his unmade projects, so in 2005, when he was in post-production on The Fountain, he was attached to an adaptation of the novel Black Flies by Shannon Burke, which is about a young man who takes a job as an EMT in Harlem before starting medical school. Then he was attached in 2007. 2007 is when he became attached to Black Swan, but he also became attached to The Fighter.
Oh yeah, which he ended up producing.
He ended up executive producing that, and it was directed by David Russell, who took over in 2009, and Aronofsky made The Wrestler instead.
Whoa, hell yeah, all right. Come on, baby. Dance with me.
Here?
Yeah, right here. Come on. Come on.
Yeah, I've danced to this plenty.
Okay, I'll dance for you then. Here we go.
You can get your shift.
Hey, man, I need a job. There we go.
Oh, it's a lap dance I'm getting.
Right from the beginning that you would end up winning. I knew right from the start you put an arrow through my heart. Round and round. Yeah. God damn, they don't make them like they used to.
Fucking 80s, man. Best shit ever.
Oh, bet your ass, man. Guns N' Roses, the rule.
Crew.
Yeah.
Def Leppard.
Then that Cobain pussy had to come around and ruin it all,
Like there's something wrong with wanting to have a good time.
I'll tell you something. I hated the fucking 90s.
90s fucking sucked.
90s fucking sucked.
Which brings us to Randy the Ram Robinson, Mickey Rourke's comeback, Aronofsky's fourth feature, The Wrestler. It's in many ways a departure for an Aronofsky, I think, because it's scripted by Robert D. Siegel, and the film is a character study, let's say, in a way that his other films aren't. I mean, Pi, you could argue, is a character study of, Max, this kind of mathematician character, but in terms of its style, it was kind of a showy film in a way that this isn't. I mean, it's a very social realist aesthetic, which again is a kind of a departure for an Aronofsky. And we've got these Dardensian tracking shots, again, which I suppose is an attempt at intensified subjectivity, that track the character protagonist through the corridors. I mean, I think it's a while before we actually see Mickey Rourke's face in this film. And I think Aronofsky's playing with the idea that this was a film that was very much marketed as Rourke's comeback. It's centered around him, and I think he plays with that idea at the opening of this film because it's, as I said, it's a long time before we actually see him. It's like, what's he going to look like? I think it's a great performance from Mickey Rourke, and I like this film a lot.
Yeah, I'm very fond of this film. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Do you think that it was a business move, like a kind of a career move for Aronofsky? After, as you said, spending 6 years developing a film that was, critically divisive and commercially unsuccessful, was he kind of, not to necessarily make too direct a comparison, but was he, could he potentially, if he had tried to do another Fountain, gone down the Richard Kelly path?
Yes, but I think he was discouraged away from the Fountain in a way that Richard Kelly wasn't, having made Donnie Darko.
Yeah, and Southland Tales.
Yeah, Southland Tales, which you're a big fan of, right?
Oh.
I still haven't actually seen it, but I know from several trusted sources that it's a film that I might actually get on board with.
Oh, really?
But, yeah.
I'd be interested to hear.
Yeah, that might say more about the trusted sources than it does the film. But anyway, coming back to The Wrestler, it's a film that, regardless of the means by which he arrived at making it, I think it's an extremely strong film. Mm-hmm. Debatably his best, although I do hesitate to say that because after our discussion in a previous episode, I don't want to perpetuate the idea that a film needs characters with whom we identify in order to be kind of likable. However, having said that, this is very much a film in that vein. We're invited to kind of sympathise with Randy's predicament, his plight, although he obviously makes decisions and does things in this film that, as viewers, we might find morally complicated, which I think is to the film's strength also. It doesn't couch his...
it's a great character study.
Negotiation of the world. I think the weak link for me is actually Evan Rachel Wood, as Stephanie, his daughter, his estranged daughter. I'm not. It's a tricky role to play, I think, but I'm not sure the film really knows what to do with her.
Yeah.
Relationship with him.
Yeah. I agree that she's the weak link. I actually also watched Todd Haynes' Mildred Pierce miniseries recently, and she's also the weak link in that.
She is? Okay.
Offhand, I can't actually think of a performance of hers that I've really enjoyed. But I always hated wrestling.
I love wrestling.
Yeah. Even as a kid, I
loved wrestling. I
Right.
absolutely loved it. Around about the time its peak for me was like the year in which Pi was released, like 98, 99. That was for me like, in my Stone Cold Steve Austin loving days.
I kind of remember when I was before. I don't know. You'll know the actual time of this, but when it was Hulk Hogan and Jake the Snake, was that like early 90s?
Yeah, I mean, like that's 92, 93.
Right.
But
Yeah,
then, like wrestling's like it is a soap opera, and so the same characters get resurrected years later, and looking very old, and much to the same degree that Randy the Ram Robinson does in this film.
Right, because I remember getting Jake the Snake and Hulk Hogan action figures in Kellogg's boxes and things like that when I was 7 or 8 years old. But no, I remember like of a distinct memory of my brother and I watching whatever we were watching, whatever event was on some Saturday morning, and just laughing at it, just thinking it was really cheesy and silly.
Yeah.
But I don't feel that way about what's depicted in this film. I think it's a very good detailed depiction of a particular subculture that gives you all of the kind of peculiar, rituals and procedures that they have to go through in order to do what they're doing.
And the performativity
before and after.
involved in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And
the extent to which the kind of the quote unquote wrestling is fake kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where there's a kind of a semantic problem where it's like it's fake in the sense that the outcome is preordained, but
yes,
it's not fake in the sense that like they're it's really physical, it's really athletic. I mean, it's fake in the sense that ballet is fake or whatever. It's like it's choreographed, but it's not. I mean, it's still
we'll get
intensely
to Black Swan
athletic.
in due course.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this is I love the richness of, as you said, that as a theme, and how the physical toll that commitment to a career within that community does to one's body. It's a real thing of consequence here, underlined by that kind of horrifying sequence that leads up to Randy's cardiac arrest, where it's an interesting decision to tell it the way he does, Aronofsky, because we see Randy the Ram going into the fight, and then we cut to immediately after where he's getting kind of stapled up by the paramedics on site, and then we get parallel cutting. We get flashbacks, and so we cut to 14 minutes earlier, I think it is, where he's having the fight, and it's a kind of a Japanese style death match, we might say, where the ropes around the ring are replaced with barbed wire, and there are various props inside the ring. That's
the one where the guy staples the dollar bill to his forehead, isn't it?
Yeah, his own forehead. Yeah. And then there's a sheet of glass being chucked over his head, and it's
brutal. And I mean, that's not. I mean, you can fill me in here. That's not like what Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock did. This is more like underground style wrestling, is it?
Yes and no. I mean, that's the era in which Mick Foley was in his ascendancy in the WWF, now the WWE, and he would usher that style in from those kinds of underground areas.
Is it kind of a situation where they have to kind of like constantly up the ante? To draw crowds. Okay,
and interestingly, WWE is now PG, so we don't get any blood involved these days,
right?
And none of that kind of extreme brutality is involved either these days.
Yeah, it's an interesting drama. It's an interesting depiction of what happens when you choose a physical occupation.
Yeah, and it's emphasized even in the scenes outside of the ring, where there's ill-fitting clothing in which Mickey Rourke is made to kind of walk around, the trailer park where he lives. His clothes just seem very, very small, and this is kind of an exhausting film to watch. I think in a very different way.
You can feel his fatigue.
Are exhausting to watch. They're exhausting to watch on kind of like a formal level because there's, as I said, it's kind of like very anti-cathartic. This is also anti-cathartic in its own way, the way the character kind of ends up with the film. But I love the parallels also that are embedded within its theme. So we've got Marissa Tomei, who I think gives an excellent performance as Cassidy.
Yeah, she's really great.
Really great.
In terms of the choosing the physical occupation.
Yeah, and the performativity
getting older
involved as well.
Yeah. So she's the stripper who's getting a little bit older. And,
it's a career.
It's a very good
age.
gendered parallel.
And then,
which is also people talk about Black Swan as being like, oh, he made a movie about a wrestler and then he made a movie about a ballet dancer. But the thematic relationship, I mean, they are there, but in terms of an actual kind of balanced, like gender balanced thematic connection, it's really within the wrestler between Randy and I forget her name.
Cassidy.
Her real name is Pam. Cassidy is the stripper name.
That's right. Yeah.
Pam's her real name.
Yeah, and it's a warm depiction of both communities, let's say. Although, of course, the Pam's workplace environment is a lot more predatory and less communal than the cultural exchanges, the social contracts in which Randy's involved. But there's also, I love the parallel within Randy's narrative also, when he's about to go out into the workplace of his day job in the deli counter, when he asks for more hours because he's no longer working as a wrestler, because he's been advised by a doctor that if he continues doing that, he's going to have a premature death because of the strains on his heart. And it's really hilarious. I mean, I find all of Aronofsky's films funny in their own way, and I think there's this great moment here in this film where he's going to go out onto to work the deli counter for the first time, and we get the sound of the wrestling crowd chanting, which is he's psyching himself up. We've all been there, like nobody wants to work in these kinds of environments, in these situations. It's like and it really underscores the comfort with which he can perform in front of a crowd that's kind of ushering in his own violent downfall, really. And yet, there's something that's ostensibly a lot less harmful. That arena of the workplace is just something that he doesn't, grasp with. And then it's extremely funny when he finally starts to settle in and have a little bit of a repartee with the customers.
Yeah, that's great.
And it's something that I relate to as well. Once you've got a little bit of confidence under your belt.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I like the sort of tension between that kind of like underclass day-to-day reality and the. He in his trailer in the trailer park, he sleeps with an American flag over his bed, and it's kind of like American dream kind of thing. And then like the payphone that he uses, the payphone, it's like under a bridge beside a dried up riverbed, and it's this really like stark, sad kind of image, lonely image. And
the whole thing was shot in winter time as well, it looks like, so which adds to the bleakness. What do you think specifically of Mickey Rourke's performance?
I think he's great.
Yeah.
I'm not actually that familiar with Mickey Rourke's pre-comeback films. I haven't seen that. I can't think of any that I've seen.
Year of the Dragon.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen that, and I haven't seen Johnny Handsome yet either.
Angel Heart.
I have seen Angel Heart. Yeah, I have seen that. Yeah. Another really, really funny pair of scenes are the scene where he walks in on his boss watching pornography in the supermarket in the middle of the afternoon. That's really funny. And then there's a parallel scene later on where he's having sex with the woman who was a fan of his when she was a kid. And they're just like having sex in the bathroom, and there's no lock on the door, and a woman walks in and just goes, "Oh, get a room," as though every other time she walks in there's somebody doing that in there. That really made me laugh, particularly the second scene because of the first scene.
Get it.
Yeah.
So I also love that scene in which Randy kind of comes to terms or finally realizes that, what am I doing? What am I doing? When it's like a Comic-Con kind of equivalent, where and these things happen where like old stars from the 80s, way past their peak, way past their physical capabilities, will go with their own merchandise that they'll keep in their trailer park homes or whatnot, and they'll go in order to then sell autographs or photographs.
Yeah, I mean it's the same with like actors who were on like geek beloved shows.
Yeah, absolutely.
30 years ago, and they don't really have an acting career anymore. Even the cast of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking about that. Yeah.
But and it's actually interesting as well that I noticed that the title font and the introductory titles and all are very kind of superhero ish.
Yes,
they're superhero font, comic book kind of style that you would get at the beginning of like a Marvel movie. I also really like the shopping scene. I think that's really funny. That suit that he picks out for his daughter, that green suit.
Yeah.
That's a really nice scene. And the scene in the bar. One thing I would say is, to what extent do you think? To what extent do you buy his love for the sport?
I buy it to the degree that it's all he has.
Yeah.
And there's a moment about 2/3 of the way through where you think, okay, he's resurrected his relationship with his daughter, which is a positive force in his life, and there's also a level of romance happening with Pam, and then that all kind of falls apart because we might say, okay, he's one sort of feeds into the other. The causal framework, again, similar to Requiem for a Dream, the social forces in place here, the systemic contradictions that lead him to usher in his own disconnection from both of those characters. And so we get that at the very end of the film. He speaks to the crowd and he says, "You guys are all I have," and stuff like that. And it's a statement.
Yeah, you guys are the only guys who are going to tell me when I'm going to stop doing my thing.
Yeah, and it's a statement to Pam, who's in the audience, although she's left at that point, he doesn't realise. But it's a statement to her as much as it is to all of the others. Yeah. When he breaks what in the wrestling terminology we would call kayfabe. He kind of breaks the fourth wall at that point. Sorry. And so I think it's a very sort of believable depiction of that need.
I think I agree. I agree with you. I don't think it sells the passion for the sport that he professes. I don't think is entirely sincere. I think, as you say, it's all he knows. It's the only place that he's ever been celebrated and idolized, and really felt like his life has a real kind of meaning and purpose.
I mean, that scene in which he invites the young kid who lives in the same trailer park into his home in order to play the video game, and it's like so outmoded, and the young kid's trying to promote Call of Duty to him, and it's like so he's very much living in the past.
And he has the action figure based on him that he gives to Pam to give to her kid.
Yeah, that's right.
But I do think that the way that I read the finale of the film anyway was that. It's not like would you call what he does at the end of the film suicide?
I think it's a death-inducing act, it's left ambiguous, but the presumption or implication is that he's going to die as a result of this final dive.
Oh, I think it's heavily like, I mean, he's in the middle of having a heart attack when he does it.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's also a continuation of Aronofsky's sort of Christian themes, or if we can refer to them as such, or at least sort of religious themes. Because this Christ-like figure, I mean, Passion of the Christ, the Mel Gibson film, is mentioned in this film as well. When Pam says to Randy, you should totally see it. And, he is this kind of like self-sacrificing character who, undergoes very painful processes for our benefit, I suppose.
I find the... Yeah, so emotionally and psychologically, I find the final scene to be a little bit out of left field, because I don't fully buy that he really loves this. Because they've sold his fatigue to me to the point that he would rather do anything but this almost. And he, so to me, I do think that his return to it is suicidal.
Yes. Yeah, it's a very conscious return to that, to a community that appreciates him and appreciates this act that he's about to enact. And I just love the whole warmth with which that the community of wrestlers is portrayed, like the way they're sort of semi-improvising moves on the run up to it, and then afterwards where they're all kind of like patting each other on the back. And, hey, great show, man! And I like it. And
it's a very good film. I really enjoyed it. There was some controversy at the time that I wasn't aware of, that the wrestler I think his name is Bob, who he comes back. He has a car dealership or something.
The final one,
fight, his character's name is Ayatollah whatever. That was controversial in Iran when the movie came out.
Yeah, but I mean it's a very, very feasible throwback to wrestling. I mean, he's come back because they're reenacting their fight that they had, this championship title fight in the 1980s, I think. And but in WWE, you had like people like the Iron Sheik, like Nikolai Volkov, who was like this communist figure.
Okay.
And Sergeant Slaughter during the Iraq War.
Yeah. So I mean, it's rooted in I mean the American working class.
Absolutely.
And underclass audiences.
Absolutely.
And their values, and it's very much playing to that.
Yeah. And without mocking them, because that's a demographic that I think invites ridicule. It is very easily mocked, and it has been the subject of ridicule in films. I think of like something like the flip side to this would be something like Napoleon Dynamite, something like that.
Which I love that movie.
Oh, you do? Fair enough. I haven't seen it. But I mean, this is a very, very endearing portrait, and it's to the film's strength that it is.
Yeah. Okay. So Aronofsky moved quite quickly. As I said, he was attached to Black Swan as early as 2007. So the only other project that he announced, or that he was announced as being attached to between making The Wrestler and Black Swan, was MGM's remake of RoboCop in 2008.
Okay.
Which was at that time set for a 2010 release. He did Black Swan instead, and Jose Padilla, the director of Elite Squad, took over and made the film. Did you see RoboCop?
I didn't see RoboCop, and I can barely remember the original. Would Aronofsky's version, you think, better than the one that was made?
I'm sure it would have been, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did you like the remake?
Not really.
Is it as bad as the Total Recall
it wasn't terrible.
remake?
No, it's nowhere near as bad as the Total Recall remake. It's just a bit of a flat, kind of uninspired remake.
Yeah.
But, yeah. Anyway, so his next film was Black Swan.
Who is that? Hey. You okay? You can't smoke in here. Oh, I won't tell if you won't. So, big day's getting closer and closer, huh? Well, I can't wait. I think you're gonna be amazing. Thanks. Come on. So, do you want to talk about it? And is that our day? Well, we're playing a little too rough for you. Come on, Nina, he's brilliant. Sure. But it's not like he's all warm and fuzzy. Well, you don't know it. Someone's hot for teacher. Oh, come on, it's okay. I don't blame you. I should go home. Oh, Nina, come on. I'm just playing around.
Okay, so in January 2011, me and my high school pals, my good friends, let's say non-cinephile friends, in order to break our habit of forming social gatherings around alcohol, we had this New Year's resolution to go to the cinema. I think the plan was to do it once a fortnight on a Sunday evening. And the first film that we decided to see as a group was Black Swan. It was also the last film that we went to see. This is what I wrote about it at the time. This is the first paragraph of my review. Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan is good, but is rarely great. After The Wrestler, it is the second feature that the filmmaker hasn't scripted and continues to show his strength as a director of more straightforward narrative films. Here, ballet dancer Nina Sayers, Natalie Portman, scores the lead role in a new performance of Swan Lake, but though she has the discipline and technique to make a great white swan, she lacks the natural sensuality of the black swan. Instructed by impresario Thomas Vincent Cassell to get in touch with her dark side, Nina, by way of befriending her more outgoing colleague Lily, Mila Kunis, begins to imagine she is taking on the traits of the black swan. Sorry, I didn't realise that the first paragraph was just a synopsis of the film. I thought it was going to be a lot more opinionated. But the first sentence, Darren Aronofsky's Black Swan is good, but it is really great. Okay, so I watched it again recently. I disagree with that. I think it's a very good film.
I thought it was okay when I saw it in the cinema at the time. Now I think it's a little bit less than okay.
Oh.
Yeah, I didn't like it. I think it's a weak film, and it strikes me as not weak, but it comes across as hollow to me.
It does.
Yeah, I don't really connect with it. I should say that I said that I hate wrestling. I also don't like ballet. Like, I don't like watching it. I find it really, really tedious. So,
okay.
Would you be a ballet fan?
A fan would be a very strong term to use, but I'm speaking really from a point of ignorance. I've never watched a ballet. I've never attempted to watch a ballet, so I actually don't know. I have no further interest in watching ballet after watching this film. But it's not an advert for Swan Lake as such, is it? I think this is a very darkly comic film. It's a very funny film, and I think a large part of that is Vincent Cassel as Thomas Leroy, the impresario. I think he's like magnificent in this film, and he's barely in it in terms of screen time. Like it's Natalie Portman's film, very much so, and I think she's excellent as well. I think it's got three, arguably four really, really great performances. Like Mila Kunis is very, very good as like the sort of dark, possibly projected character. Like, does she exist? Doesn't she? I don't know. Again, it's a very ambiguous film on those terms. And then Barbara Hershey's extremely good as Erica, Natalie Portman's on-screen mother.
Yeah.
Of course, I forgot about Winona Ryder, who's actually, I remember being in it a lot more than she ultimately is on a rewatch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Of course, a film is more than the sum of its performances, but I don't know. I think there's something to this film that I really like. I don't know. Natalie Portman's character from the off is already halfway to imagining dark things. Right? It's not like she's such a heavily repressed character in terms of her commitment to something that is so demanding as a career and as a life choice. Manifests itself in repressed sexuality, like her sort of the Oedipal sorts of themes that arise from that, already there at the beginning of the film. That's my point. It's not like it's not an art. I mean, like her position within the ballet, I suppose, accelerates everything, but everything's kind of already there waiting to be provoked.
Mm-hmm. I have a thing about films where we're rooted in the subjectivity of a particular character who's losing their grip on reality. It can be used as an excuse to stage shocking scenes that then you don't have to follow through on the dramatic consequences of those scenes.
Yes.
And when you do it too much, nothing has any at a certain, I remember going to see Now You See Me, which is actually it's not quite the same. It's not a character losing their grip on reality, but it's one of those films where it's the one I'm talking about, the Jesse Eisenberg one.
Yeah, but I haven't seen it.
It's about a group of
magicians, heist. It's like a heist movie, right?
Magicians who pull off heists during their shows, and every 5 minutes there's a twist. And it's basically, the twist is, they pull the rug out from under the audience every 5 minutes and say, oh, you thought that's what just happened. Well, actually, it was this. And then 5 minutes later, it's like, oh, you thought that was what happened, but it was actually this. And half an hour into the film, I'm like, well, whatever I'm watching now, I'm going to be told in 5 minutes that didn't happen.
So what about a film where it's embedded into the very concept, like The Game, Fincher's The Game, which I haven't seen in many years. Although
The Game is a little bit similar to Now You See Me in that respect. Yeah, it's a better film, but yeah. I would compare this one though more to something like Robert Altman's Images or something like that, where it doesn't go into like something like Polanski's Repulsion, where we get like the character alone in their apartment and it just goes completely full tilt into surrealist imagery. It gestures in that direction and then it moves back, and you get a scene like where she kills Mila Kunis's character.
Yeah, very late.
And then
it's part of the climactic sequence, I suppose.
And bundles her up in the bathroom in her dressing room.
Yeah, only to return
goes back,
and then finds out
she's gone. So I get a little exasperated with that kind of thing. I remember Robert Altman's Images is the same kind of thing. It's a woman alone in a country house and she's losing her grip on reality. And
wow, I can't wait until we discuss Mother, because I still don't know what you think about it. But don't reveal anything. Okay, so that's a problem for you. So the question is, at what point does that kind of thing become too much in a film? Because arguably it's there in Pi also. And I know that you've already expressed problems with certain elements of Requiem for a Dream, where you thought like there's a certain goofiness to the hallucinatory elements.
Yeah, I don't find the imagery in Black Swan goofy. I just with Pi is so full of ideas, but Black Swan is not. Black Swan is a pretty thin premise, and he also the imagery is very repetitive. Don't you think?
Yeah, it's. I mean, in terms of its visual palette, it's almost monochrome at points.
It's a lot of tracking shots of the back of Natalie Portman's head. You know.
Yeah, but then there's a lot of tracking shots at the back of Mickey Rourke's head in The Wrestler.
Yeah, but The Wrestler has a compelling character at the center and a story. Black Swan, it didn't draw me in at all. I really felt completely at a distance from it.
You don't.
And whatever problems I had with it when I first saw it were, compounded this time.
And that's despite Portman's commitment to the role. And I mean, would you agree that it's a great performance? I think she does a lot with what she's given. I think she nails that, weirdly inherent imbalance of like somebody who's very, very dedicated to something requiring a lot of discipline, but also is borderline arrogant with it. And that's the culture in which I suppose fosters that sort of thing. We also have Stanley B. Herman again as credited as Uncle Hank on the New York subway, gesturing towards Natalie Portman's character. And actually, we haven't mentioned at this point Mark Margolis, who is in all of the films that we've discussed so far, all of the features at least. He's in Pi, he's the maths teacher. He's in Requiem for a Dream as the guy to whom Jared Leto sells his mother's television. He's in The Fountain.
As a priest.
Yeah, as a priest.
And
the Conquistador.
The Spanish priest who knows knows the location of the Tree of Life.
And he plays Mickey Rourke's landlord in the Wrestler.
Yeah, right? At the trailer park.
Yeah, here he plays I think just a patron, is it? And it's certainly not a big role. I'm not even sure if it's a speaking role. Maybe it is.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. But okay, so it's a weak link for you.
How do you feel like about the definition of the Lily character? She's kind of used in a few different ways throughout the film. She's seen as kind of like someone who's come in to usurp Nina's position in the troupe.
Yeah.
And then also she's supposed to be kind of like representative of the Black Swan.
Yeah.
The dark doppelganger.
Yeah, and she's also like Nina's like dark side manifesting itself. Like there's that. It's a great standalone sequence, I think, where the film all of a sudden bursts into colour in terms of its visual palette, where we get the green and red neon sequence in the nightclub, where I think it's the soundtrack by the Chemical Brothers. And yeah, like, is it Mila or Mila Kunis?
I would say Mila, I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, let's go with, I'm going to say Mila, you say Mila.
Okay.
I'm right in thinking or remembering that this was kind of like her breakthrough role, right? Like she wasn't like overly known at this point.
Well, she was known for That 70s Show.
Okay.
But I'm not sure about feature films. Yeah, it could have been a crossover film for her.
And so she embodies the opposite to everything that Natalie Portman represents. So, like, she's like this openly sexual and very sexualized figure, who in many ways like is the logical choice to play like the lead role in Swan Lake. And Vincent Cassel says as much, like, but I don't know, like, what was the question? Like, what do I make of her? Like, I mean, it's ambiguous in terms of
the way that she's
exists.
used. Yeah, that's the thing. That's another thing. Yeah, so she seems to be a kind of a multi-purpose character in symbolic terms. She seems to be used in a few different ways that aren't necessarily well defined. I don't know. To me, it feels like a spec script that was intended to be kind of like a potboiler psychological thriller. Set against this particular backdrop that was picked up by somebody like Aronofsky, who decided to try to transform it into something more kind of prestige or art house. But it feels half worked through to me conceptually.
You can see how it lends itself to an Aronofsky project because of the themes of like obsession, let's say, physical pain, and the barriers of physicality that one tries to transcend in order to, in the process of kind of finding one's position in the world or life. Yeah, I mean, I don't get me wrong. I don't think it's anywhere near his strongest work, but I think you're being a little harsh on the film.
My favorite part of it is the Nina's relationship with her mother,
which is
that's by far the strongest stuff in the film.
Which is very Carrie-like.
Yes.
Right, and Barbara Hershey is incredibly good as Erica, the kind of oppressive presence overbearing presence in Nina's life. Yeah. So what do you're a horror buff. What do you make of like the visual moments, standalone visual moments where Natalie Portman's reflection starts to do things that she isn't, etc.
I mean, we're going to talk about this in relation to his latest work also. The dabbling in what are really very much, contemporary, conventional mainstream horror tropes. Is, I mean, if this was let's say a different director had picked this up and done, stuck more to what I presume the original kind of script was, those moments would be regarded as cliche and not particularly effective. And I think that's what they are. They're cliche kind of jump scare moments where somebody swishes past the camera or swishes past a doorway, or somebody suddenly something appears in the mirror, and there's nothing wrong with the jump scare, but the use of fairly kind of generic technical scares in these kinds of lofty, critically adored Oscar nominated films is a little irksome.
I do.
They get consistently shit on when they're in genre films.
I do think Aronofsky's kind of aware of the ballpark in which he's playing here. We've got that like a really, really funny moment towards the end of the film in the climatic sequence where the guy who's dressed as like some sort of black feathery creature just walks past backstage back past Natalie Portman and goes like an otherwise like frightening creature. Who I think we've seen like in sort of apparition like moments previously in the film, and he goes,
"That's the figure that kind of swooshes past."
That's right, and he goes, "Hey, how you doing?" Or something to that effect.
Yeah, I'd call it his weakest film.
Okay.
Weakest feature film. No Time. It's definitely.
Yeah, it's
definitely
nowhere near as good as No Time.
Okay, all right. So. After Black Swan, which obviously Black Swan was a huge hit, it won Natalie Portman a Best Actress Oscar. It was nominated for Best Picture. I think it won a couple other Oscars too, and it was a huge commercial hit. It was obviously a really, inexpensive film to produce, and it made. I don't have the figures, but it was extremely profitable worldwide. So it opened a lot of doors for him. So, I mean, we talked about like the business decision of doing The Wrestler after The Fountain. I think The Wrestler followed by Black Swan was a very wise move on his part. So there are a lot of projects in the wake of Black Swan that he was attached to that he didn't make, although some of them have been made. In September 2009, so this would have been when he was in post-production on Black Swan, he was attached to an untitled heist thriller that was based on the February 2006 Securitas Depot heist in Tonbridge, England.
Did that come to fruition? I mean, I
no,
know
that wasn't made.
Okay.
No. Do you know of this heist? Do you remember
it? Yes, I remember it very well. No, yeah? I have no idea what you're talking about.
No, in Tonbridge. Where's Tonbridge?
Yeah.
You don't know? Okay. He was also in 2010. He was attached to a film called The Tiger, which was going to star Brad Pitt, which is a kind of survival thriller kind of thing. It's a true story of a 1997 case with a Russian animal activist who was in charge of like a game preserve kind of thing, or not a game preserve, a wildlife preservation rather. Was tasked with hunting a man-eating Siberian tiger. Which is apparently still in development with Brad Pitt and a different director. In later that year, he was attached to a film called Machine Man, which is based on a novel by Max Berry. It's about a gadget geek at a tech firm who decides to systematically replace his weak, fleshy parts with high-end titanium performance upgrades that he's designed.
But that's very Aronofsky.
That obviously goes awry.
Yeah.
Then shortly after that, he was attached to the second. He was going to reunite with Hugh Jackman and direct the second Wolverine film, the one set in Japan that James Mangold ended up directing, which I thought was really, really bad. He left that to do Noah. So the opportunity came along to do this passion project of his. In 2011, he was attached to a film called Human Nature with George Clooney at Warner Brothers, which is about a man who's cryogenically frozen and wakes up years later into a world in which humans have become pets of another species. Okay. Which sounds kind of good. And he was also attached to direct Jackie to reunite with Natalie Portman. He ended up producing that film. It was directed by Pablo Larraín. Did you see it?
I have still not seen it, but it's sort of high on my to-watch list from films that came out over the past year or so.
I really liked it. I thought it was excellent.
Yeah.
So then he, as I said, he left the Wolverine to do his passion project, which was an adaptation of Noah.
When I heard talk of miracles, I dismissed them. But then I saw the birds with my own eyes, and I had to come.
There isn't anything for you here.
No. This all belongs to me. This land, this forest, that stronghold of yours. Did you really think you could protect yourself from me in that?
It's not protection from you.
Then what is it?
An ark. To hold the innocent when the Creator sends his deluge to wipe out the wicked from this world.
Return to your cities of Cain. No, we have all been judged.
I have men at my back, and you stand alone and defy me? I'm not alone.
Okay, so in 1982, at the age of 13, Darren Aronofsky wrote a poem called The Dove, which won him a poetry competition. I'm going to read the poem now.
Okay.
Evil was in the world. The laughing crowd left the foolish man at his ark, filled with animals, when the rain began to fall. It was hopeless. The man could not take the evil crowd with him, but he was allowed to bring his good family. The rain continued through the night, and the cries of screaming men filled the air. The ark was afloat until the dove returned with the leaf. Evil still existed. When the rainbows reached throughout the sky, the humble man and his family knew what it meant. The animals ran and flew freely with their newborn. The fog rose and the sun shone. Peace was in the air, and it soon appeared in all of man's heart. He knew evil would not be kept away, for evil and war could not be destroyed, but neither was it possible to destroy peace. Evil is hard to end and peace is hard to begin, but the rainbow and the dove will always live within every man's heart. So, in coverage of the 2014 release Noah, a lot of people suggested that Aronofsky had been working on the film since 1982, which is a little bit misleading. He has been interested in the story of Noah's Ark since he was a young teenager.
Yeah. It's a terrible poem. I mean, I'd like to hear a lot of the other entrants. I mean, into this competition, but yeah, do go on.
That's the end of the poem.
Okay, so you're a fan of Noah?
Well, I saw Noah in the cinema in 2014, and I thought it was a mixed bag.
Yeah.
I liked parts of it and disliked others. I thought I thought that it was a weird. I mean, I still think it's a weird.
It's an extremely weird film.
No, I don't necessarily mean a weird film. I mean a weird choice for the studio to hire an atheist filmmaker to make a film about Noah's Ark.
Yeah.
That is a complete departure from the biblical text in numerous ways, like directly contradictory to it in several important ways, and because he's reinterpreting the story, and the story predates Christianity. It exists in other cultures and religions that are older than Christianity.
Sure.
This story of the Great Flood, but he's interpreting it as an environmental parable.
And formally as an action
then you're
epic,
gonna
almost.
and then you're gonna pitch it at what they call the faith-based audiences in the US. We got this like religious.
What do you think they made
film?
of?
They didn't like it at all.
Yeah.
They didn't like the departures from the text. They didn't like the environmental message. Because of the association between the religious right in America and climate change denial. it was seen as kind of a hippy dippy kind of thing. It's also regarded as vegan propaganda.
It is.
Yeah, because Noah and his family don't eat animals.
Yeah.
And it's all about like, oh, they ate meat, and that was like they're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
Which is directly contradictory to the biblical text. In the biblical text, he takes 2 of every unclean animal, but he takes like 7 of the clean animals. Clean meaning fit to be sacrificed.
Right.
So when they find land after the flood subsides, they make burnt offerings of those clean animals to God, and God smells their burning flesh, and for some reason that prompts him to promise that no matter what humanity does in the future, he will never again wipe us out.
What, because he likes the smell of burnt meat?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. He's a barbecue fan.
That's exactly it. Yeah. I tried to find out if Aronofsky is vegan. He approvingly retweets vegan stuff on Twitter.
Oh yeah, but retweets aren't endorsements still.
He also was referred to as a semi-vegan.
Okay.
In a New York Times article. I don't know what that means.
How does that work? This is a film that I found extremely silly when I went to see it at a cinema a few years back. I remember kind of laughing at moments that I didn't think were meant to be funny. And yet here I am a few years later, and I'm watching it again, and I'm thinking, well, it's obviously like meant to be humorous on many levels and at many moments. This film, I really like it. I think it's actually a very good film.
Yeah, I really liked it.
I'm a big fan of Russell Crowe, and I think it's to the film's huge advantage that Noah as a protagonist is a throwback to some sort of Charlton Heston type epic action hero. Who's this like obstinate, like comically obstinate character? Like there's that great line late on when Noah's going to kill Emma Watson's twins. She has babies, and he goes, "I will not be stopped." And I remember laughing at that early, like when I first saw it, and I think it's an extremely funny moment in this film as well. This time round, Jennifer Connelly, the return of Jennifer Connelly to Darren Aronofsky's work, who has, I suppose, less to do than Emma Watson.
She has less to do than Emma Watson, and also her big scene, I think, is the weak point of the movie. Really, it's one of those really raw emotional scenes where she confronts Noah, and I don't think she sells it.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not great.
Yeah,
when I was watching it, I was kind of cringing a little bit at some of her emoting. She was the fake crying is very. Emma Watson's not great at that either, apparently. But,
I mean,
it's one of those scenes where you're kind of going, wait, have I ever seen Jennifer Connelly give a really like powerful raw performance? I can't think of any. She's always been kind of serviceable, but
yeah,
he asks a lot of her in that scene. You would really need to be like a really strong actor to sell that.
What about the Todd Field film, Little Children?
Yeah, I mean, she was fine in that, but again, she's kind of asked to be kind of icy, and it's not. She's not given. Yeah.
I don't know if there was like a difficulty between Jennifer Connelly and Russell Crowe in terms of like their chemistry, but that I never really buy them as a unit. But I'm not sure if that's to do with the way Russell Crowe tends to operate as an actor. Like he very much, he embodies a very physical, bulky figure in this film, and as I said, I think it's to the film's advantage. He holds everything together. Ray Winston, I mean, like he's just like something from he's just stepped up off the set of like Game of Thrones.
Ray Winston is great.
I mean, like he killed your woman. Like he says that to I think it's Ham. On the premise that Ham's the girl who Ham had chosen, he had been with for more than 10 minutes.
Yeah,
it's like 30 seconds.
She got trampled in a stampede by Ray Winston's army.
Yeah, and all of a sudden that makes him sort of
and stepped in a trap that he laid. So I remember when Noah visits he has the vision that he becomes convinced that mankind should actually die out.
Yeah,
he visits this Ray Winston's army's campsite, and they're eating animals, and they're eating each other, and it's just this like mayhem and slaughter and horror. That scene, like that's another scene where it's like, okay, well, once they replenish the earth, the implication is that it'll be like the Garden of Eden, and they won't eat the animals anymore.
Yeah.
Let me just read you the actual passage from the Bible. Noah built an altar unto the Lord, and took every clean beast and every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savour. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done. Okay, so I mean, like as an illustration of like the insane capriciousness of the Old Testament God. Right? He just turns on a dime here. While the earth remaineth, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. And God blessed Noah and his sons, and said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth. Despite the fact that he just said, oh, well, mankind is evil in his heart from his youth.
Yeah.
There's nothing. He's just basically throwing up his hands and saying, okay, you know. But I don't know how he infers that from the smell of burning animals. But anyway. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moveth upon the earth, and upon all the fishes of the sea. Into your hand are they delivered. Every moving thing that liveth shall be meat for you. Even as the green herb have I given you all these things. I mean, it directly, you know, contravenes the actual end of the story.
Yeah.
In that sense. You know, Noah, like, because Aronofsky in every interview around the time that this film came out, he said Noah was the first environmentalist. Like, nah, not really.
Yeah.
Also, the end of the biblical story where they find land, Noah plants a vineyard, gets drunk on his own wine, falls asleep naked in his tent. Then his son Ham walks in and sees him naked and unconscious, goes outside and tells his older brother Shem and his younger brother Japheth, Dad is passed out naked in the tent there.
Yeah.
And Shem and Japheth take a blanket and put it over their shoulders and walk into the tent backwards and lay the blanket on their naked father, not seeing him. And then when Noah wakes up, somehow he knows that Ham has come in and seen him in this state.
Yeah.
So he curses Ham's child Canaan and all of his future progeny to be the servants of his brothers Shem and Japheth forever. He'll be the servant of servants.
Which is a pretty vindictive thing to do, considering.
Yeah. So it's pretty crazy, weird postscript to the story that doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything, but he includes it kind of in the film. The scene where he passes out drunk is there, and Ham does see him. But the backstory with Ham, where Ham betrays him and where Ham wants a wife and he tries to rescue that girl, that puts it in a completely different context. So Ham leaves. He like walks out into the wastelands. I'm not sure what the intention or how would you read that?
Does he flee into the woods, or is it into the wastelands?
He walks into the wastelands. I'm not sure, because it's not from the Bible. That's an original creation. I'm not sure what he's supposed to be doing. Is it the implication that he's going to like be the evil man or whatever? I don't know.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
But in the Bible, it refers to Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives. So this issue of like Japheth and Ham not having women is not.
Maybe it was like Aronofsky lining up a potential for a sequel. I mean, like watching it again, I thought, wow, this is such like, especially after Black Swan, which is a very, very muted color palette. This is so sumptuous. Not only sumptuous, but so heavily sort of synthetic and artificial, which I think a few years ago I would have and indeed did have problems with. But it's I mean, like, it's such like a, visionary is a term that's become meaningless because it's so widely misused or so widely used anyway. But I think this is a truly visually ambitious project.
Yeah, visually it's fantastic, and there's a lot of stuff from The Fountain makes a return, like the spontaneously sprouting flowers and the planting of the seeds. It's also the mock time lapse long takes.
Yep.
Which show the evolution of the species.
Yeah.
I remember thinking that was a kind of a strange thing when I saw it in the cinema, where it's like, okay, we know that Aronofsky doesn't believe that this is a literal history of the world.
Yeah.
He's an atheist. So you're depicting evolution. He depicts it in that kind of weird way where it's like, oh, a fish became a lizard, became a rodent.
Yeah, it's like Fat Boy.
simian.
It's like the Fat Boy Slim video for Right Here, Right Now.
The idea that, like, there's this kind of linear progression of species, which is kind of one of the things that people who don't understand evolution, try to criticize it on those grounds. So the fact that he goes as far as he goes up to apes, and then he doesn't show the ape evolving into a human. He just shows humans as these golden beings of light in the garden.
Yeah,
it kind of reflects back on the depiction of evolution as like almost like it's criticizing that that depiction.
I love that moment. Just briefly, I forget the moment at which it occurs, but it's like you've got like humanity, different silhouettes of different sort of eras within human history.
That's when Noah tells the story after they found land toward the end.
That's right. But within that sequence, it reminds me a little bit anyway. It reminds me of that moment in the New World where we see the real life anachronistic moment of the real life grave of Pocahontas.
Oh yeah,
at Gravesend. And in this moment in Noah, we get like silhouettes of like World War I soldiers and like moments of human history that presumably or ostensibly came after this great flood. And I liked it because it kind of breaks the fourth wall at that point.
Yeah. Also alluded to is by Ray Winston is the extremely long lifespans that are described in the Bible, that these characters live to be 800 or 900 years old. And Noah says that it's been 10 generations since Adam. And Ray Winston, I forget the character's name, it's something Cain. He's like a descendant of Cain.
Tubal Cain.
Tubal Cain. He says when Noah talks to him about the Creator, Tubal Cain says, we haven't heard anything from the Creator since he touched Cain, or something like that. Which means that the way that he says it sounds like he's been around.
Yeah.
He's been around that long. It's like, it's not like his ancestors. It's like, no, he's been alive for 600, 700, 800 years. Yeah. And it's been that kind of length of time. But yeah, I thought it's a nice little kind of subtle allusion to that.
I mean, Anthony Hopkins looks like, he's like thousands of years old.
Yeah. Actually, he's really funny in it, looking for the berries.
Ah, yes, the berries. Did you bring me some berries?
And he finally finds the berry, and then he gets killed by the flood.
Yeah.
It's great, yeah. What do you think of the Watchers?
Yeah, so voiced by Nick Nolte and Aronofsky regular Mark Margolis. Right?
Oh, really? Nick Nolte?
As Sam Yaza and Magog, respectively. Like, again, it's like they're from a different, their whole different universe, right? Like,
I love them. I think they're great.
Again, like, first time round, I was like, this is so just like daft and silly. And again, not again, but this time round, I didn't have a problem with them. They seem very part of the cinematic universe that Aronofsky's created.
But it's a very beautiful visualization, I think, of embodiment. Also, the idea that to go back to what we said about the fountain and the Spanish Inquisition, and the idea that bodies are prisons for the soul. Yeah. That these are beings of light that are encased in stone.
Yeah.
And I mean the scene where one of the Watchers is killed by what is his name? Tubal Cain. Sorry. Tubal Cain's army kills one of the successfully fells one of the Watchers, and they rip his body, his stone body, apart, and his soul returns to heaven. Yeah. And the others look and say the Creator calls him home, and then they start fighting even harder. That whole sequence is amazing, actually.
Yeah.
Really, really well done. And then the last one kills himself, kind of. He like rips open his own chest to free his soul. It's great. Yeah, they did you ever see they kind of remind me a little bit of the Ents in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
The giant trees. But they also remind me of, did you ever watch GoBots when you were a kid?
GoBots?
Yeah, it's often described as a Transformers knockoff, but I actually think it predates Transformers.
Okay, no, I don't know.
It was bought by Hasbro, and now GoBots are like a subcategory of like a line within the Transformers series.
Should I know about them? I feel like
they're not as famous as Transformers.
I feel like I've said something ridiculous by not knowing what GoBots is.
No, I watched them as a kid, but there was a GoBots movie in the 80s called Battle of the Rock Lords. They go to a planet where there are these essentially other kind of Transformers, except that these are robots that can transform into rocks, and they get kind of caught up in this like war of clans and stuff. And like Noah has always reminded me of GoBots, Battle of the Rock Lords.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's your obscure reference for today.
I mean, I did think. I did worry at the first time around watching this film. This is very much getting into one of those tedious mass battles. I was like, why can't Noah and Tubal Cain have it out with a game of rock paper scissors or something like that? But yeah, it works. Yeah,
I really enjoy it. Okay, so when he was in post production on Noah, he became attached to a Judy Garland biopic called Get Happy. I don't know the status of any but one of these projects.
Okay.
Another film, a film called The General at Paramount that was described as an Unforgiven-esque film about George Washington. And also an untitled Evel Knievel biopic that he was attached to in September 2015 at Sony. But he was also attached to direct Jennifer Lawrence in the adaptation of the spy novel Red Sparrow that has been directed by her Hunger Games director Francis Lawrence, and it's coming out in I think it's coming out in March.
Yeah. Is that like a Bourne Identity like spy film, or is it like a throwback to old fashioned Cold War espionage movies?
Judging from the trailer, it's a little bit Jason Bourne, kind of like, or maybe like the Charlize Theron film that just came out, Atomic Blonde.
Yeah, okay.
Kind of. I actually initially thought that it was based on a comic book, but it's a novel. But it has a kind of a comic booky kind of feel. Certainly the trailer.
Okay.
But yeah, so his next film that he made was did unite him with Jennifer Lawrence, and it was Mother.
Why don't you want kids?
Excuse me?
I saw how you reacted earlier. I know what it's like when you're just starting out and you think you have all the time in the world. And, you're not going to be so young forever. Have kids. Then you'll be creating something together. This is all just setting.
What did you think of it?
I went into it completely blind. I know you were extremely excited about it from what you'd gathered and what you'd seen. Had you seen trailers? Yeah.
No,
okay.
I didn't watch the trailers.
Right,
Deliberately didn't watch them.
But you'd read sort of what the concept of the film was.
Well, when it was initially announced in 2015, the log line was and remained actually right up until it was released. Uninvited guests visit a couple at their home, disrupting their tranquil existence. And when it was announced as a project in 2015, it was announced as a drama. And I mean, that log line is so non-specific that the content could be anything. And when the film was in production and it was being reported on, it started to be referred to as a drama thriller.
Right.
And I became a little bit more interested. And then it started to be referred to as a horror thriller. And people were saying, it's kind of like a Rosemary's Baby thing. People are turning up at the house because this woman is about to give birth to something.
Yeah.
And then the reactions came out about it, and it was like incredibly extreme. And
and you were encouraged by the mixed response that the film has received as well, even before so when the trade reviews landed, like what others had taken to be weaknesses in the film, I think you had interpreted it as things to get very excited about. I still don't know what you thought of the film, though. So I'll answer first since you asked me. I really liked it. I went into it again, as I said, without knowing anything about it. So I didn't know about the whole home invasion angle. I didn't know when that gets tied up. I think at the midpoint of the film, I didn't really know what to expect, and then it jumps ahead like 9 months, and like she's about Mother, played by Jennifer Lawrence, is heavily pregnant and about to give birth, and then the whole film begins to repeat itself, and I didn't really know what was going to happen. But ultimately, I did like it. I have a few minor reservations here and there, but I'm still kind of working through those.
Right. I thought it was okay.
Okay.
I thought it was a mixed bag. My major criticism of it is that it's way, way, way too long. For such a thin premise, it could make you could easily cut like half an hour out of this film and only make it better.
Yeah.
Like I said about Black Swan, it becomes very, very repetitive. I mean, in discussing the film, Aronofsky keeps talking about how there are only 3 types of shots in the film. It's either looking at the back of Jennifer Lawrence's head, looking at her face, or showing her POV. And I mean, yeah, that's true, and that's very, very limited.
I thought it was interesting.
Limited aesthetic menu.
I think it was interesting structurally that she is the subjective force in the film. Like everything is sort of seen through her, and yet she is readable as a figment of Javier Bardem's character, his imagination.
Right.
So there's that tension there structurally in the film.
The presentation of the part where she finds the photograph of him, it's like an old photograph. It's sort of fainting in the direction of like, this is a mystery and we're gonna try to find out what's really going on here.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work like that.
So one of my minor reservations of the film is, you mentioned a few episodes ago with regard to Twin Peaks: The Return, puzzle box narratives, where a great deal of energy is spent just figuring out what's happened. Like, I think this is ultimately a thin enough premise not to satisfy that kind of approach. But disappointingly, I'll say, the film hints at its bookends that there is meant to be some kind of explanation as to what's going on here. So it begins with one woman's face, it ends with another's, and then in the middle we have Jennifer Lawrence. So the implication being that Javier Bardem's this like character from like the universe of Noah who lives many, many generations, who just is able to resurrect his home at whim, and the life of a female partner. Right?
I mean, I took Javier Bardem to represent God,
yeah,
and Mother to represent Mother Nature, and the house to represent nature.
Yeah, and you've got like Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer playing Adam and Eve, and
right,
being
exactly.
tempted by the. Yeah, I mean, as far as symbolism goes, this is a very. It's not like a confusing film in that sense, and it's a very.
And it tipped its. That's the thing about the mystery thing, is that it tips its hand in its opening scene, where the house, is recreated. It regenerates itself.
Yeah.
To the point where like, this is not the way that it was sold. Okay, so this is one of only 19 films in history to receive an F cinema score from American audiences. Like, this is polling exit audiences, and the list of films actually includes some films that I like and love. So films like Wolf Creek, In the Cut, William Friedkin's Bug. What else is on there?
So the films, although they're very dramatically different from one another, we could say they're operating on a certain level of visceral horror.
Well, there are some like really just dreadful comedies. Let me just pull it up here. Okay, so the other ones that I liked or loved, I liked both Killing Them Softly and Soderbergh's Solaris.
Okay, wow.
The other films are an odd one that I haven't actually seen. It is Dr. T and the Women, the Robert Altman. Like, kind of, I always just thought it was kind of like a middling rom-com.
Yeah.
These films are either movies that audiences were kind of sold a pig in a poke, like in the case of Mother, where they thought they were getting something akin to Rosemary's Baby, and they got something completely different.
Yeah.
I think that probably holds true for something like In the Cut, where they thought they were getting some kind of like Meg Ryan thriller, and they got what they got. The other stuff, Richard Kelly's The Box is on here as well, where it's like, they thought they were getting kind of like a cool, quirky Twilight Zone thing, and then it just goes full Donnie Darko in the second half.
Yeah.
The other ones are there's a lot of kind of like horror films that were badly received. Fear.com, The Devil Inside, Alone in the Dark, stuff like that, and then some terrible comedies like Disaster Movie.
But where the more
Mother's in rare company there.
Yeah, but where the more sort of big budgeted productions are concerned, there, it seems to be a response that's informed by a consciously misleading advertising,
deceptive
campaign.
marketing. Yeah.
So it has been divisive. I think a lot of the I mentioned at the outset of this episode that a lot of the even the praises, or let's say the positive reviews of this, have either been begrudging or surprised, the tone of them. I think here of Nick Pinkerton's review in Sight and Sound and Michael Koreski's for Reverse Shot, where the implication is, if not the explicit confession, is that Aronofsky, up until this point, has provoked skepticism, let's say, critically. And it would be the case again with this film if it wasn't for the fact that he also mounts, and I think I'm paraphrasing Koretsky's review in particular here, if not for the fact that he mounts his best filmmaking to date in telling this story. I think, okay, I don't disagree with the claim that this is too long of a film, especially given that he's demonstrated himself to be a very economic storyteller of these thin kinds of premises with in The Fountain. However, I do think for its first half in particular, it's an extremely controlled, extremely effective film centering around Jennifer Lawrence's paranoia. Not only paranoia, but her frustration. It's an extremely aggravating experience to go through watching her, and I mean that in the best sense, like to watch her having to undergo this or negotiate constantly, like Javier Bardem, who's hilarious, I think, in this film.
Really funny, yeah.
And Ed Harris, like, and Michelle Pfeiffer, like the first half of the film.
Did you see Joy?
I didn't know
the Jennifer Lawrence film, because the first act of that ish is this mother reminded me of it, the idea that like she has this kind of like family, that she's the sensible one in the family, the responsible one, and she's trying to kind of like micromanage and like deal with all these like little domestic crises. It's a similar kind of feeling that, you know, just this kind of like manic energy and this kind of like domestic bedlam that reminded me of that. But yeah, I mean, like, to me, I agree with that. I think the first half of the film is like, I was totally on board with it, and it just wore me down and wore me out eventually. But the other thing is the concept is really, really weak, very kind of inflexible and didactic. And I mean, the fact that Aronofsky is, you know, pontificating about this at every opportunity, about what represents what in this, and it's like this direct one-to-one relationship where Ed Harris represents Adam, and you know, the sink breaking represents the flood, and the baby represents Jesus, and this kind of thing. It's just not interesting at all. Like, it really is. I in order to enjoy, because I mean, you kind of cotton onto that pretty quickly, that this is some sort of allegory about, you know, nature and you know, just drawing on religious stories. But I had to kind of cast that aside to enjoy the scene for scene content, which I did. You know, like the staging of the wake, and like the people coming in, suddenly they're painting the ceiling, and like they won't stop sitting on the counter, and you know, the sort of in scene escalation of that kind of manic energy was about the funniest thing I think that he's ever done, and really, really just like I was glued to that. But I think after the wake, it kind of starts to wear out its welcome.
What you mean when it's all of a sudden 9 months later, and I think it's a lot of that's also the mental or psychological energy that is lost. I mean, like, there's a momentum in the film, and then all of a sudden we kind of have to start again. Like, I mean, like, physically sitting there in the cinema, we are having to really readjust, and it's one of those films. It's such a linear film. We have to constantly reevaluate our position to it. And I don't mean like morally or anything like that. I just mean in terms of like the actual narrative energy of the film. So Ed Harris and Michelle Pfeiffer, I think, are absolutely hilarious. And then actually I began to worry a little bit once the Gleason brothers, their fallout reaches its culmination. And, you know, they're all going to the hospital. And then when they return, and then all of a sudden there's a rapid escalation of people in the film, and escalation of events, and escalation of surrealism, I suppose. And I did worry at that point, because I thought this can only go so far, and I'm aware that we're only halfway through the film. And so when it sort of
that is the high point of the film for me, is the wake. Would you agree with that?
I thought the high point of the film, yeah, I suppose so. Although I was beginning to worry during it, because I thought, I want this to kind of end. And once Ed Harris disappears in Pfeiffer, I wanted them back. Right. So I spent a large part of the second half of the film wishing that I was rewatching the first half. rather than watching this new escalation. Although, and then when it gets into Children of Men territory with Kirsten Wiig like as this like literary agent, like just like ordering the execution of people, I thought that was extremely well done.
Oh yeah, for sure, yeah, definitely.
Without, I mean, once it establishes that,
like, it doesn't lack for technical proficiency.
Yeah, I mean, once it establishes that anything can go at this point, the film could be like, it could be 3 hours long. It's like this Buñuel thing. Where repetition.
Yeah, he keeps bringing up the Exterminating Angel, but the Exterminating Angel is like 90 minutes.
Yeah, no, it's true.
It knows when to get out.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the thing is like that. All it really has going for it is that it is a dark comedy. The idea. I can totally understand audiences feeling deceived. Because it's not tense or scary or foreboding on any level. And again, like I said with Black Swan, the kind of gestures in the direction of like horror filmmaking are a little bit kind of empty and insincere. The scene where after they go to the hospital with I guess Abel, she's left alone in the house, and we get a shot of her. We get a like a mid shot of her. She bends down to pick up something up off the floor, and the space that she had been occupying in the frame reveals Donald Gleason standing there, and it's like, oh, a jump scare again, which is he's lifted it out of, and I don't mean that in any like derogatory sense, but that is where it comes from. It comes from mainstream contemporary horror filmmaking, but he's not committing to generating the kind of atmosphere that sort of scare originates from. I don't know. It doesn't work for me. I'd rather he either left it out or committed to it.
Did you see a few years back a short film called The Guests by Shane Danielson?
No.
It's a short film that premiered at Cannes in 2015, which centers around a woman whose newborn child is treated by guests at a dinner party as if it isn't hers. Like they're all entitled to, have a say in this baby's life, and she's very much kind of cast aside. And it's as a short films go, it's very, very taut. It's very, very well made. Watching Mother, and I had been kind of tipped off about this comparison by a colleague. But Aronofsky, I'm not sure if he saw Shane Danielson's film, but it's extremely derivative. I mean, to the point where like Shane would be kind of justified in feeling a little aggrieved. But yeah, I mean, The Guests is, as I said, like a short film. It's like 20 minutes at most. Mother's 2 hours. I see where you come from. Like, what about?
I mean, I think there's a solid 70 or 80 minutes of good material in it, but I don't know why it's 2 hours.
Yeah,
it just is. It's exhausting.
It is. It is exhausting. Like all of his films are, though. But exhaustion seems to be almost the narrative thrust of his films, or the psychological effect of them.
Yeah, but I mean, this is the first time that he's exhausted through pure duration.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean.
Yeah.
I don't feel that The Fountain is too long. It's emotionally exhausting, but it's not. And same with like Requiem for a Dream. It doesn't feel like you need to cut 20, 30 minutes out of this film.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
And how do you feel about How do you feel about the concept, the allegory? Like, do you get anything out of it as a concept? Like when Aronofsky stands on a stage and talks about this represents that and this represents that, and I was feeling angry, and this is about the way that we treat the planet, and the house is a microcosm for the Earth. In a similar way to the way that the Ark is like a microcosm for nature in the Noah's Ark story. Also,
sure.
Like everything else is destroyed, and what remains is in the Ark. The house is the Ark essentially in this story.
To be honest, I hadn't really paid much attention to what Aronofsky's been saying about the film. Was he pontificating before this film was like?
No, because they didn't reveal anything. Yeah. But it was like he was like he couldn't wait to in all the press.
Yeah.
It's because he's in other cases he's been a little bit cagier about the meaning of particular things. Like in Pi, there's the presence of the ants, which he says that he specifically requested, and his producer was like, okay, well, if you get the ants, we can use ants. But he in the commentary track, he for some reason, even though he talks about a lot of the symbolism, he won't talk about what the ants represent. And to me, the ants represent, like the ants are crawling around on the circuit boards to me, they represented, people in cities in the way that, in like Koyaanisqatsi, you kind of get those. Have you seen Koyaanisqatsi?
Yeah. So the match cuts between
the match cuts between the signals on the circuit boards and the cars on the highways and things like that. So that was what I took from it, and then you have the ants crawling on the numbers on the final credits as well. So it's like humans trying to understand nature, and I don't know. Anyway, whatever. Similar in the Fountain, he won't talk about certain things, what they mean. He didn't want to he leaves that for you to, like the way that the three stories interconnect. He refused to talk about that for some reason with Mother.
But regardless of one's knowledge of what he's been saying about the film, like the symbolism's there, and it's not unambiguous. But isn't that the nature of symbolism in general? Like you get it, and then your appreciation of the film is kind of what it does sensorially or aesthetically with it. So your point is that it doesn't really do anything.
Well, it depends on. I mean, it's not just symbolism; it's the structured allegorical commentary, like this kind of interventionist commentary, where there's very little room to follow your own intellectual impulses when you're watching the film. Is just this represents this and this represents this, and it's all so rigidly ordered and structured. And I don't think. I mean,
which actually,
the idea. Okay. So the idea of having God and Mother Nature living in a house that represents the world. Okay, fine. I mean, I agree with you that it's more like a short film idea. But and he says that it works as a relationship drama as well. I don't think it does. I mean, it does to a point, and then not anymore. Like early on, I would say, yeah, okay, fine. But later on, no. But the idea then of like, well, we need something else, and it just seems like he just kind of arbitrarily chose the Bible. I mean, where it's like we'll just go through the Bible, it's like we'll have Adam and Eve show up, and then we'll have Cain and Abel show up, and then we'll have the flood, and then
But he sticks to what he knows.
But it's just exactly. But it just seems like a kind of arbitrarily chosen structuring principle, except in the sense that eventually it gets to the point where we start to flash through human history. But no, on a conceptual level, the film didn't work for me at all. It was really not interesting at all. But
which is
as a kind of as a dark comedy.
Yeah, I mean, Javier Bardem when the shit's hitting the fan again in the second half, and I don't want them to leave. I mean, and like even when that horrible, excruciating neck crack of the is the baby's neck cracked?
Yeah, they break its neck. Yeah.
Even that, like when it happens, I'm like, oh my god, that's like it's darkly funny. What do you make of? Okay, so you weren't fully on board with this film, I think it's fair to say. What do you make of like the many dismissals of the film on the grounds of like it's another film in which woman is suffering or made to suffer, and it's like dismissing the film on ostensibly like feminist grounds, like.
I mean, it is about a woman suffering.
Yeah.
But I mean, just because it depicts it doesn't mean that it condones it. I mean, like that would be the most uncharitable reading of Darren Aronofsky's intentions imaginable. That what he's depicting here is some sort of depiction of a sort of an ideal state of affairs. I mean, in fact, he's very explicitly this is a howl against what it depicts. Both, and he says it works as a relationship drama. So.
Yeah,
obviously, primarily for him, it's a commentary on climate change.
I mean, a friend of mine did say that, and I agree with him, that there is a certain toxic truth to be found in its depiction of a marital predicament. Like the mechanisms by which the husband, credited as him, Javier Bardem's character, the mechanisms with which he retains control of a situation, firstly, but secondly, and vitally, retains control over his wife. And I think a large part of the darkly comic thrust of this film is the fact that the whole thing's predicated on a character, regardless of the symbol behind the character, but a character who's a poet, a writer, and the fact that a writer can be that popular in demand in 2017 I found extremely funny.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot more than you did, I suppose. But I do agree with you on the front that, especially in its second half, once it's sort of blown its load, let's say, that it establishes, as I said, a level of anything goes to its narrative. And at that point, it's like, well, this could go anywhere, and it doesn't feel in any way structured, which is actually counterintuitive, it feels like, or paradoxical, because it's an extremely structured film.
Jennifer Lawrence actually commented on these exact allegations in an interview. Let me just...
The biggest tool that I used for my character was the connection with the house, because I see us as one organism. By chance, I was reading Jane Eyre, and then I read The Wide Sargasso Sea. So to me, this is incredibly feminist in the way that these Victorian patriarchal novels show these loving, amazing husbands that are very slowly and delicately taking away their wives' dignity. It's not anti-feminist to express something or to show something. To be a feminist movie, we don't have to all be women and all be, aggressive. Before we even knew what feminism was, people were writing these novels that were showing women's strength being drained away from them. So to me, to answer your first question, this movie is incredibly feminist, but it's also what Darren is saying, it's much bigger. We're taking, allegories and metaphors that are universal and also biblical.
So what Jennifer Lawrence was saying in that interview, that you don't have to depict strong women necessarily. You can depict a social situation in which because it's not fair to expect all women to be strong enough individuals to overcome systemic pressures that are like grinding them down. You have to accept that the problem is the systemic pressures. And I like for a film that I loved that I know you didn't like was Under the Skin.
Yes, but it's also one of the films that I'm keen to reevaluate.
Okay, but there were some criticisms that the film was anti-feminist, but because it starts with she's not a woman, she's an alien being, but she's embodied as a woman.
Yeah.
And she's obviously extremely strong and independent, and she's this very efficient predator. But the longer that she spends embodied as a woman in this society, the more that society's effects start to sort of change her character and grind her down and make her subservient and take away her independence. Which you want to look at that and say, okay, well, that must mean Jonathan Glazer thinks that's the way women should be. Yeah. Well, no, that's you just don't have to read it that way. Like what Jennifer Lawrence is saying in that interview about, I totally agree with her about the Victorian novels, which are the same.
Yeah, I agree.
These are novels that were written by women who were depicting what that society of that period does to women, and you don't have to depict women overcoming it.
No, sure. I mean, it's
unrealistic and unfair to expect women to take on that responsibility. To stack the deck against them so greatly, and then
it's like it's. Did you see Mustang, the Turkish film?
Yeah, I loved it. Yeah, it's great.
Oh, you loved it, but I think one of the possible problems of that is the sudden leap into this like feel good film about like the strength of womanhood against the patriarchy, where actually it might have been a perhaps even more powerful film had it not made those fantastical leaps and actually see the social mechanisms by which womanhood doesn't always prevail.
I took that one more as a fairy tale though.
Yeah, very much so.
But I think both approaches are completely valid. I mean, I think you can take either side. But I think just to flatly assume that a film has to be some sort of commentary or it has to carry some sort of implicit statement that what it depicts is the author's idea of the ideal state of affairs is
And at any rate, even if you were to make that kind of reading of this film, I think it's a wrong one, because I think there's enough there. Only a cursory take on this film could amount to as much, because I think there's stuff in there where we're heavily invited to sympathise with Jennifer Lawrence's character. I mean, she's kind of the opposite in this film to Katniss in The Hunger Games, and to a character in Deborah Granick's Winter's Bone, which is a film that I really loved. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah, I loved it.
I think she's a marvelous actress, actually, and is fully capable of embodying both ends of that spectrum very, 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 very well. And it's a very, very astute comment for her to have made that, I think, in relation to this film in particular. But I think a large part of that reading is also compounded by people reading into the fact that Darren Aronofsky and Jennifer Lawrence are apparently romantically entangled at the moment. And therefore they're reading it as Darren Aronofsky as the white male artist who is kind of working through or processing his problems in that regard.
Yeah.
And therefore, they're bored by it. And it's fine, of course, to be kind of bored by this film, but I think that's an unfair framework in which to structure your critique.
Yeah. Okay, so one thing that we didn't do at the end of this inaugural Journeyman episode last year was rank our Aronofsky films. So we're going to add that now. So we got 7 movies. Do you want to give me your? I don't know. Let's give me your bottom 2.
So his worst film, if you like, would be Black Swan, I think, which is a 6 out of 10. But if your worst film's a 6 out of 10, okay, that's pretty good going. And then his second worst film, or my least favourite, is Pi, which is also a 6 out of 10.
Okay. All right, I agree. I'm going to go Black Swan at number 7 and 5 out of 10 for that one. And then I'm going to depart a little bit from you. I'm going to say Requiem for a Dream at number 6 and 6 out of 10.
So Requiem for a Dream would be my number 5, which is a 6 out of 10. And then my number 4, and this surprises even me, I think, Noah, which is a 7 out of 10. I like Noah.
Okay. My number 5 is Mother, 6 out of 10. And my number 4 is Pi, 7 out of 10.
Okay.
So give me your...
my 3 and 2.
Well, I mean, you may as well give me your 3, 2, and 1 in that case.
Okay, so I think his third best film is Mother. It's 7 out of 10. Second is The Fountain, 7 out of 10. And then for me, his best film so far is The Wrestler, which is an 8 out of 10. The only 8 that I have.
Okay. My number 3 is Noah, 7 out of 10. My number 2 is The Wrestler, 8 out of 10. And my number 1 is The Fountain, which, as we discussed on this episode last year, I took to very enthusiastically on my rewatch, is 9 out of 10. His best film. And we're gonna, on our end of year episodes, for the next few decades, we're gonna, if any of the filmmakers that we've covered on Journeyman episodes put out a new film that year, we're gonna cover that film so as to stay constantly up to date. Obviously, there's no danger of that with Cosmatos or. Although Orson Welles has a new film out this year.
Yeah, he does. Anything's possible. I mean, I had forgotten that I'd agreed to that stipulation, but I'm fine with it.
Okay. All right. Thank you for listening to episode 1 of The Journeyman, and you can follow us on Twitter at _Journeyman, and you can subscribe on SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, and YouTube. My name is Bobby Lowe, and I've been here with
Michael Pattison.
Thank you, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you.